Good morning and welcome to Trial TV Live. I am the Squeegee of Justice. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have got a great show for you guys. Gigi of Pretty Lies and Alibis will be joining us, and we're going to talk about Zachary David Hughes. Gigi was in the courtroom for all the days. She was posting on X, and we were following her, and it was an amazing trial, as you guys remember. So we're really looking forward to hearing Gigi's insights and all that went on in the courtroom. So before we get to that, let us do a check-in, see how everybody's doing. Who's with us today? Dreama Landry, thank you for joining us. Shirley Roth, Real Happy 33, Fala, Therapist You Know, good morning to you guys. Ken Rosenberg, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Baka, good to see you as well. Oh, I have my trusty little sidekick over here, Super Ball, keeping an eye on the backyard there, as always. Let's see who is with us and who is excited about today's show. Fala, I see you are. Cajun Bayou Queen, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Krista Limited Edition, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Leslie, good morning to you. Nan R, hello. Marty Horford, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Lily Wayne, good morning to you. All right, so let's get to Gigi. Gigi, are you ready? All right. Good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, everybody. I'm good. I'm on number 4.
Number 4.
yeah. I run off coffee. I think my blood type is medium roast.
Nice. And that's like 4 in the last half hour, or have you
yeah, like last hour.
The last hour, yeah. I used to drink coffee when I was younger, and it just tweaked me out a little bit too much. So I've cut back. I drink tea, but I don't drink coffee anymore. But I understand.
Yep. I'm just making up for you.
There you go. Sounds good. So do you want to give a little introduction as to who you are and what it is that you do for the 1% that don't know who you are at this point?
Yeah, so I'm Gigi, and I host Pretty Lies and Alibis, and I also do some freelance stuff for Law and Crime Network, and just love telling the facts of these cases and bringing the victims to life. This case was not easy in that sense, but yeah, so I just love really diving in and getting the facts and the meat of the case and putting that on my show, and that way we can all stay caught up on the craziness that is the true crime world.
Absolutely. Now, how long has Pretty Lies and Alibis been an entity?
Almost 5. It'll be 5 years in June. It was the day that they found JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan on Chad Daybell's property. My best friend and I started the podcast. Her nickname is Fruit Loop. I've never called her by her real name. And we just, it was really born out of COVID boredom, like a lot of podcasts were. And we had followed the Vallow case since that first press release. And we kind of threw the idea of a podcast around, but the day we saw Nate Eaton over the property in a chopper, I was like, let's do it. So we started off in a closet in the back of my house with a built-in iMac microphone, and luckily, we're able to keep doing what we loved. And she left to run a domestic violence safe haven. And I just kept going. So we still meet in the middle and collaborate on stuff. But yeah, so it's almost 5 years. That's crazy. I'm almost on my 1,000th episode. That's
wow.
Wild. Yeah,
congratulations on that.
Yeah.
So have you been following true crime for a while, your whole life? Like what brought you into it?
The very first case that I followed was Susan Smith. That was local for me, about 30 minutes away. And then years ago, I did a little internet show that is now long gone. It's not even on the internet anymore, but got out of it because my kids were little, too much travel, really just didn't want to be on the road a whole lot. And then COVID and Lori Vallow pulled me right back in. And so, it's, but I've always kind of been, the Forensic Files kid that like grew up watching that and just always fascinated. at how you can take a case that seems impossible to solve, but nobody's getting away with much these days.
No, with DNA and digital forensics, cell phone data, we talk a lot about that. Cell phone data, CCTV, it's hard to crime these days.
It really is. You need to leave your cell phone at home and ride a horse on back roads if you want to even have a remote chance of getting away.
Well, one of somebody in our chat said if she were ever to do a crime, she would put her cell phone on a Roomba and just let it go around. And
That's funny.
In her living room.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. Yeah. So, all right. So, Zachary David Hughes, what a trial, right? We were following you on X and following your updates on your YouTube channel as well. So first of all, thank you for posting, because even though the Judge Fant had it on a 30-day delay, right? You were still able to post in real time, correct?
Yeah, we were able to tweet. At first, we didn't think we would, but we got some clarification that even though it was on the delay, we could live tweet. So that was nice. And then if we had a break where something big happened, just hop out and do a YouTube short. But it, sometimes big things happen and it's like, you can't put it in a tweet the way you want to be like, oh my gosh, y'all, this totally just happened in this courtroom. But yeah, so we were able to live tweet at that 30-minute delay. It was a little tough, especially with him not allowing anything outside the presence of the jury to be streamed. So sometimes too, it was nice to be in the room and be able to update everybody on what was happening that you guys weren't going to get to see.
Yeah, I have to say that was a little aggravating that we were not able to see outside the presence of the jury, because I would love to have, obviously we can't hear sidebars, we get that, but a lot of the, I have a feeling there was a lot of motions that were argued or things that were argued that you guys obviously heard, but we couldn't. So that was a little frustrating for us.
Yeah, and the other thing too is there were a lot of proffers off the camera. So if they would have allowed the child abuse materials to come in, they were essentially proffering what other witnesses would have testified to. One was a professional from Utah that specializes in the biological changes to DNA in a child who's been repeatedly abused that way, and how it affects, little things on your DNA strand actually shrink. And, but he didn't get to come up. We also had one of the lead investigators talk a little bit about some of the things that were found on Bradley Post's devices that they would have testified to had it been allowed in, which was horrific. I mean, it's just, and I've read some filings that detailed Christina's direct participation in all of this. So it was interesting to hear how the trial really would have went in a much different direction, I think, had that been let in with your witnesses and maybe even with the jury.
Yeah. Fitz News, are you familiar with them?
Oh yeah, those were my trial buddies, and Troy with Blunt Force Media, who, before I forget, he did an on-camera interview with John Mello and I believe the daughter of Christina the day before Mello was arrested. That'll be coming out at some point. But so Fitz News, Jen Wood and Dylan were my seatmates, and they're great, and they've been all over it.
Yeah. I was kind of poking in, keeping an eye on them as well. They said that there was a jury or a juror that came out that was upset at the verdict. Can we talk about that, or is that something?
No, I read the article. So it really, I don't know. Well, it could be a second juror. I've only read the one that came out at the end of last week, but it was one of those things where that juror felt it would have been very pertinent to have had the child abuse materials in there, because it would have made more sense. Because that first week, you could really see the gears turning with the jury. And I love, my favorite thing is watching the jury, because the body language and, how they present themselves just sitting there tells a story.
Sure.
And, so one of the first witnesses was Bradley Post. He tells he's the fiancé of Christina. He found her body. He's in a jail jumpsuit, but not arrested for anything related to her murder. And so you kind of could see the jury like, well, why are you in jail? And he tells, I'm living off of businesses I've sold and retirement. So it's like, if it was a bondable charge, he would have gotten out. And they mentioned it was 9 charges. Then every time his cell phone was mentioned, the jury was sent out. So you could kind of start to see the clicking a little bit. It wasn't until Zachary was on the stand and just let it all fly it was like the biggest light bulb moment. You see jurors, like their mouths go wide open and they're looking at us because one row of us from the media, it was like every day we were there, they were looking at our reaction. We were looking at their reaction. And that was such a huge moment when you see 3 or 4 jurors who finally put Bradley Post together with the charges, with the cell phone, and then he's saying there is proof. So that was a really big moment in the trial for us that were watching the jury. It just, then you knew, some of them at least know what's up.
Sure, sure. Speaking of the jury, what was the makeup? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I don't know the male to female ratio. It was very diverse. I mean, age, race, sex, everything. You had early 20s all the way up to, I would say, mid to late 60s. It was a really good panel. They were, very attentive. But again, just that first week, things were a little bit blurry in a lot of areas for them.
Sure, sure. Were they attentive throughout the entire trial? Yeah.
The only time that you saw people sort of start nodding off is when the investigator was up and he was reading the text messages and not unscrambling them. So it was just word salad for over an hour. It's just, you almost feel like you're having a brain glitch listening to it. It's like, it's just random words.
Right.
I did see a couple of jurors nod off during that part. I think I might have too, because I had a bunch of little dots on my notes, which means that I probably dozed off and hit the dot button.
Right. Oh, were you able to use your laptop then, or was it just you were able to use your laptop?
Yeah, we were, thank goodness, because Murdaugh, we weren't able to use laptops. And I mean, I still have writer's cramp from that trial almost 2 years ago. But no, we were able to bring laptops in. They would say, turn your cell phone off, but they were really kind of chill with us on the back row just because they know we're having to talk to other people, about what's going on in there. Everybody's working for somebody. But no, so we were able to bring that. Some days I'd have like my iPad and then my laptop and I'd flip between the two because on the court Wi-Fi, you actually couldn't get on Twitter. So I was using Troy's from Blunt Voice Media, his Wi-Fi, but then I'd have to tether to my phone sometimes. Kind of frustrating, but I get it.
Right. How was the media presence? Was it large? Or were there a lot of people there from the media?
Yeah, there were all of our local stations that have followed this since the day she was killed, and then you had Court TV, Fitz News. I was there for Me and Law and Crime, and so we ABC was there. There's going to be a 2020 episode on this case. Okay. We're going to do one with Law and Crime Network. So yeah, there was a lot of media there. I mean, what's weird for me is this is such a wild case, and normally I'm used to taking planes and getting Ubers and Airbnbs and rental cars to cover a case. And I'm like 10 minutes from the courthouse. It was so nice being in my own bed every night.
Nice. Yeah. That was one of the questions I was going to ask, like, why, what was the attraction to Zachary Hughes? So I think you just kind of answered that, proximity, but was there something else that drew you to the case?
Just a very bizarre case, and I think it's unique in that in the beginning, the local reaction when she was killed was kind of, everybody was horrified because it was a brutal crime, 35, sharp force injuries, actually very few fatal stab wounds, but still, I mean, 35 is a lot, so you're thinking about in the beginning, what she must've went through. Stabbing is a very slow and painful death. Sometimes you're very right in there with your killer, and it's just such a I can't imagine. And but then when you hear Bradley Post got arrested, I thought she found out about the abuse and that's why she's dead. So then you've got all these people commenting on these local posts and stuff. Oh my gosh, like she died a hero, and then she goes from victim to villain really quickly when it's revealed her involvement and her one-on-one involvement in all of this. So it was interesting for me because it's not often where you have a victim who really becomes the villain of the story. And that was just something I've never really covered. So that was a big thing for me. And then the rose petals being scattered, although on the stand, Zachary said that it just kind of happened in the struggle, which once I saw the crime scene photos, and they showed very little, by the way, no autopsy pictures, which surprised me. But the couple of crime scene photos with her body that they showed, it really didn't look strategic. I kind of thought this probably was in the midst of everything. And, but there were so many elements of no known connection to the victim, which is odd because it's such a brutal personal killing. I
Very
thought
intimate. It's very
this is
intimate.
right. So I
You
thought
know?
intimate partner violence,
Yeah. Yeah.
but then when it was revealed that, he was friends with John Mello, they both musicians or had an in the music industry,
hmm
it started to sort of get the framework, but the
hmm
trial really just answered so many more questions.
Sure. We thought the same thing. Like we saw the crime scene photos, and we were just trying to put two and two together. And I'm like, that looked more like either she had roses there, or he came in, or the perpetrator, because we didn't know it was a male yet,
Right.
came in with, and that was the ruse. Hey, knock knock,
Right.
who is it?
Yeah.
Flower delivery. So we kind of got that right. And then we thought, well, she was probably doing anything to protect herself and just
Yeah.
smacking him with the roses. So
Your
yeah,
adrenaline takes over and you do things you probably would have never done if you had a second to thought about it. But,
of course.
and some of them were wildflowers too. So we found out
Mhm.
not just roses, there were some flowers in there, although he didn't say he brought those. But some of the roses still had petals on them. And it
Mhm.
just really looked like maybe
Yeah,
in the scuffle thing. But yeah, so there were just
absolutely.
so many different tentacles with this story that just you have that big twist. And
Mhm.
and it's not often you find a mother who is a perpetrator. Usually
Right,
it's the boyfriend, the fiance. And so you just had that whole element that really the victim wasn't likable.
right.
I'm very victim friendly. I like to tell who they were before they became a headline.
Mhm.
And you just for me it was so odd to not feel much sympathy for a victim because
Mhm.
for me I do, but what little we did hear about the contents of some of the things was just so awful that I don't think many people there saw her as a victim.
Yeah, yeah. It was a struggle. It was a struggle still with myself. My wife Erin, she actually empathizes with Zachary. A lot in our chat wanted to see him, convicted, which I can kind of agree because I'm not a fan of vigilante justice. I don't agree with that. What he did, I mean, you can't do that. You just can't do that in our society. Whether or not it was proper, that's not for us to decide, I don't think. I was struggling with, he tried once, right, to call CPS or DHS or whatever it was, and then he lied about saying that the daughter, was going through this. And a lot of people in our chat, we have a couple therapists in our chat, and they were like, if you had proof, first of all, go directly to law enforcement, and if they turn you away, go again. If they turn you away, go again. Just keep going and say, look, you guys have to do something. This is going on. You have to do something. So how did you feel about that when you kind of realized that she turned from the victim to the villain? Do you think that Zach could have tried more to get his story across before he crossed that line of actually killing her?
It's an interesting question because John Mello was sending me inboxes daily the minute that I said I was going to cover this trial, and he
Mhm.
was sending me a lot of correspondence he had with investigators when he was making his claims. And look, the one thing I heard about John Mello from day one, I really didn't want to open that can of worms. I live local. I
Mhm.
don't want to make anybody mad and somebody try
Mhm.
to smear
Yeah,
me because he was known for that.
sure.
But you do see the frustration in this one email between Mello and the investigator, where the investigator really has just had it with him and is
Mhm.
like, I'm a good investigator. We found no probable cause. The judge would not issue, a search warrant or anything. Um, Quit calling me, quit emailing me. And if you need to speak to another investigator, here's a name. So
Mhm.
for me, it was like, if the dad isn't getting anywhere with the investigators or there's just not enough probable cause, somebody going in isn't going to do, anything any better than the father. I don't blame John Mello for taking the child to Italy,
Mhm.
even though he's a little bit unhinged. Ultimately, in the end, he was right.
Yeah.
Didn't have the
Mhm.
proof, but he knew.
Mhm.
I just think that Zach was a little bit misplaced, and the prosecutor hit on this where he did this for a kid he barely knew. He'd
Right.
only hung out with John Mello 5, 6 times in Greenville before Mello went to Italy, but then you had that whole almost a month Zach was over there. I
Mhm.
really think if anything was planned, that's where it was planned, just not to do it over, text message or emails or anything that could come back.
Mhm.
But from what I understand, they don't have a lot on John Mello other than like the testimony. I don't think there's really a whole lot that
Mhm.
would point to him being involved. But I just don't think Zachary would have gotten anywhere if he would have made 10 reports because he doesn't have a direct connection to the child. And I think John Mello was probably keeping their inboxes full anyway. But it is interesting. You know, I've heard from people that know all the players. I met Zachary downtown during COVID when he was out there playing and had a long conversation with him. It blew me away when I saw his picture. But that's how they met. And this kid just wanted to hear this classical song. And I think maybe she was 10 at the time. And it just, you know, kind of, he bonded with her in a way, I think definitely like big brother or little sibling.
Right.
But, you know, like you say, it's just one of those things where, and the prosecutor said it too, vigilante justice, everybody's going to be getting stabbed.
Yeah.
You know, if I think you're wrong in this and I go stab you, then, you know, and he's like, I'll be out of a job. So I think it would set a very dangerous a very dangerous tone. And I totally said that because I can't say the other word right now. But
we know what you meant.
But, you know, it really would set a dangerous tone for the general public of, you know, if law enforcement doesn't do something quickly, then go kill somebody. And unfortunately, you still have to have that burden of proof even when you suspect abuse. And I know the child had been interviewed and I believe confirmed a couple of things. Why it wasn't escalated beyond that, I'm not sure. But, you know, yeah. So I just kind of feel like Zach just took it upon himself. You know, I'm sure John Mello was very happy to keep his hands cleanish. But at the same time, you have to wonder, I mean, he was just so close to leaving the city, going and doing an amazing job in the South Pacific. And he ended up, you know, with a life sentence. So it's, he must have felt very passionate about it for sure.
Yeah. He came back, I guess, to his credit. He was in Detroit, ready to catch that flight. He heard there was a warrant for his arrest. He did come back. So kudos to him for that. You know, it did seem like he was I don't know if this is the right word, but he seemed like a stand-up guy, right? He seemed like, you know, he was very trained. He was military, piano, was very structured. Juilliard, you know, it's a very structured. It's not like, you know, rock and roll.
Yeah, it's not like Animal House, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. So he seemed like he had, and his father even said, and Zach said as well, that he came from a very structured childhood background. You know, they wanted that structure. So it seems like when the jig was up, if you will, he was like, all right, I got to go face the music. And he was okay with that.
Yeah. And I think that too, in his mind, he thought what he did was the right thing. And I think that he probably never could have imagined that the child abuse wouldn't come in. Because that was just it really put the trial on a different course for him. And I remember, and this was one thing the juror that talked to Fitz News said, is one time the bailiff didn't shut the door all the way. And they heard the judge reprimanding Hughes because he had said, I think this was the second time he had brought up the child abuse material. And the judge said, you know, you can't say it. And he said, look, I put my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. And that's what I'm doing. And some of the jurors did hear that. So I think that he was just convinced that he had to save this kid from the actual abuse that was happening. It's just, you know, there's that whole line there between saving a kid versus, you know, brutally murdering a person where, you know, one gunshot. And that was one thing the juror said as well. Had it been like one gunshot wound, it might've set better with the jury. But at the same time, the number of wounds she had and the brutality and the premeditation that he did to commit this crime, you know, you just can't allow people like that to be free. Because you have to look at the brutality of that crime and the fact that he went and did it. You know, that's a big one for your first one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a slippery slope when we start to get into that vigilante mentality. That's a slippery slope because then where does it end? You know, where does it end? Is it hair color, you know, color of your skin? You cross the street in the wrong way. I don't agree with, you know, it just, like I said, it just opens up Pandora's box.
It really does. And, you know, but I think we all can agree that if any good came out of any of this is that the child was free from that. It would have gone on. John Mello was in Italy. He knew if he came back to Greenville, he was going to get arrested. Eventually, the judge dropped the charges in the middle of the trial, saying he had full custody and Christina had no rights to her kid. That's another thing for me is why would she not have custody of her kid from the time the kid was a toddler? It's very odd that, you know, it shouldn't be odd, but it is still odd when a dad has full custody of a kid and the mom has standard visitation. We don't really know why. I would love to know. was there a guardian who felt she wasn't the best one? Did she not want the kid? I'm just, there's a lot of unanswered questions still with this case, though.
I thought that came up at one point. I don't know if it was testimony or if it was in closing, where that Christina did not want
That's
the
right.
daughter.
That's right. That was what the defense said in their closings. That's correct. Yeah. And I don't know how much validity there is to the escort stuff, although I've heard rumors. But there's just so much there.
Yeah.
And ultimately the biggest loser in all this is the kid, because in spite of the fact that John Mello did things the wrong way, she adores her dad. They are like two peas in a pod. I've talked to people that have been around them together, and she's one of those kids that just does better with adults. She just has sort of that maturity where she thrives with her dad, and they're meeting with all these, big people, and she just eases right into the conversation. And John Mello's daughter actually inboxed me the day he was arrested, and was worried about her sister because she was taken by, according to her half sister, the child was taken out of school as soon as her dad was arrested, and she didn't know what was going on. And John Mello's older daughter is a very, very sweet young lady, who was obviously dealing with her dad being arrested, and then you've got this uncertainty with her little sister. So.
Here's an interesting question from Brett. Is there anything that actually confirms that the law enforcement side, that she was involved in what Post is alleged to have been doing? The history of smears in this case makes me leery of assuming.
No, we heard testimony from the lead investigator where he detailed some of what was on these videos. That's something he would have testified to had this come in. It was horrific. She was absolutely 100% directly involved in the abuse of her daughter, the other minor, and, as we know, animals. Right. So no question, this isn't a setup or a smear or anything. It was confirmed by law enforcement. And also the civil suits with the other minor, Christina's daughter and this other minor are suing her estate as well as Bradley Post. And in that civil filing, they go through in detail several of the videos where it shows Christina's participation. So unfortunately, very true, went on for a few years, and there are thousands of photos and probably over 1,000 videos.
Yeah. We read that. Yeah, we read that civil filing, and it was difficult to read. I
normally don't cover child sex abuse cases. I thank God I've never been a victim, but those just rock me to my core.
Of course.
Because I think it is one of the worst crimes out there to do that to children. And but I kind of made an exception. But at one point, I put my AirPods in and just turned on a little music while he was finishing up his testimony, because it just, it's just hard to hear. And especially a mother, it's just so foreign to me. I have 3 kids. Yeah. And, from a very young age, I educated them on predators because I felt like you have to in this day and age. And I just, it's so disturbing. She was not a likable person. No way you look at it.
Yeah. How about her sister, Tina? Did she came across, how did she come across to you?
So on the stand, definitely combative with the defense, for sure. I talked to her actually after John Mello's bond hearing the night he got arrested. She was there, and she's a very nice lady to me personally. I didn't have a whole lot of interaction with her, but she was there every day. So one thing that really stood out to me, and I think to the jurors as well, every day Zach had one half pretty much of the courtroom full of supporters, and these are well-to-do people in Greenville. One is a very prominent attorney that I believe really helped the defense in this case. And on Christina's side, you had her sister, who I think was a victim's advocate and maybe a friend of her sister. And that was it every day. One day there were 4 people there. But the jury noticed that too, in that you've got these people on Zach's side dressed to the nines. Some people came from Seattle that supported him. And then Christina, you have 1, 2, 3. And then the rest is locals that have come to sit in. I had some listeners that are from Greenville that came to watch the trial, but very disproportionate. And so, the other thing for me, I think too, is, did people pick up on that? There's got to be an elephant in the room before it was revealed through Zach that you have so many people here for the defendant. And I mean, 3 for the victim every day. It was, it was very noticeable.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if I was a juror, I would probably question that. And even though you can't talk about that with your fellow jurors, it would be definitely in the back of my mind. I'm like, well, wait a minute, who's on trial here?
Yeah. I mean,
what's the
that's
story?
really, but like I said, that was that aha moment when, and it was really the last time that he said it, that it clicked for everybody, that it was, he made a point to say Christina was abusing her child. There is proof, and the state is hiding it from you. That was the moment mouths flew open. They look at us, we look at them, and I'm like, this just got real interesting.
Yeah.
Then you have the prosecutor yelling over Zach as he's trying to finish his sentence. Jury sent out. And I mean, it was very tense in there after that jury was sent out, no doubt.
Oh, I'm sure. Okay, that leads me to my next question about Judge Fant. How do you think he handled these outbursts and handled the media coverage and handled everything?
He did a good job, honestly. I think that he was fair to both sides, but even the one juror, like I said, thought this should have come in. I think there's a better chance with John Mello's trial that the child abuse comes in because that's his daughter. This was directly why he went to Italy. But I know some people did have a problem with that ruling because it really is just the elephant in the room that nobody was really able to talk about until he got on the stand.
Right.
And so it was so interesting. But I think, the state clearly didn't want to dirty their victim up. It happened in the end. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube once it's out. But at the same time, the juror told Fitz News what they did have holdouts, which didn't surprise me once that came out. But she made 35 stabbing motions on the table and said, how is this not malice? Because we got that first question really quickly in deliberations, maybe the first 30, 45 minutes. Is malice required for it to be murder? And we all thought this is a very pro-defense question. The defense looked happy with that. Zach's supporters looked happy with that. We were all like, there's a holdout. Somebody's not on board with this. But it wasn't until that juror did that. And then after that point, it was unanimous. But we did have those other questions. And he did go for the lesser on the harassment, the second degree, which is kind of a little drop in the ocean compared to what he was facing. But what's interesting, too, is in South Carolina, John Mello could potentially, if he's found guilty, get the same sentence as Zach. That's how it works here.
Wow.
So accessory before the fact of murder, I believe with that, it could be a life sentence. Wow. So a lot at stake with this trial, ultimately, in the end, the biggest victim, again, being that kid, if her dad goes away for life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's interesting because I think we all felt in our chat that Mello was definitely the puppet master. He was the Svengali. He was pulling all the strings. That shocks me that he would be up for the same. I could see him if he's found guilty. I could see him spending 10 or 15 years, but life that seems a little harsh.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Is
what it is. Yeah.
It's kind of like if you are there when the murder happens, but you didn't pull the trigger, you still get the murder charge. It's just your accessory before. It's almost like conspiracy to commit murder. True. I'm not sure if that's kind of the interchangeable charge, but accessory before the fact of murder is just that you pretty much facilitated it or helped it along. And no doubt, I mean, Zachary would not have had a dog in the fight. So I think that, John Mello claims to have worked with like Fleetwood Mac and Elton John and Alice Cooper. And, maybe there was that little element there of, wow, this guy's like really good. And, this has to be a huge deal for him. And what can I do to help?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm just reading through Dr. Claire Rose's testimony. So to Christina's head and neck, there were 26 wounds. Seven were stabs and 19 were incised. And I believe defense brought that up in closing, where the majority of the wounds were like slashes. Right?
Yep.
Where she had the major ones in her jugular and in her back and her front. But most of them were just slices, which again, just to me makes it more horrifying, where he's trying, like you said, when he came in with the gun, he like tried to hit her on the head and he like just kind of bonked her. It's like, oh, dude, just
get it done, man. No, and I agree, and I think that part is what really swayed that jury. Is look, we know she's probably not the best mother or victim at this point, but a murder that brutal, it just, even if she is not likable at all, which to me she's not. There's just, we can't accept that as normal in society. And, had he gotten out or gotten off, who's to say that a year or two down the road, he doesn't feel somebody else is doing wrong and it's, he gets to be judge, jury, and executioner. At the same time, it's really weird for me because I'm not necessarily hating on the guy. There's that element for me that really has got me very confused or feeling conflicted.
Yeah.
But I'm just really honest about it, which is, don't like the victim, don't hate the guy that did it, because what we heard, and that was a little snippet, was horrific, horrible what she was doing. So it's been a weird case for me in a lot of ways. I'm sitting here thinking, have I lost like compassion? No. I mean, I think it's only normal as a mother or just as a human. When you hear of this being done to kids, it's just, there's nothing redeeming there. And that's your own daughter. People had theories. Was she being trafficked? She kind of had a type that she went after. But for me, I said, you'd have to blow my brains out before I would ever let anybody touch my kid, much less me. Right. So I just don't buy the whole, was it coercive control? Was it abuse? No. You would have to strangle me before I would ever let you touch my kid while I'm breathing. So, there were a lot of things thrown out there by people, a couple of people in the courtroom who were sympathetic to her, but it just, I really found no validity in that argument whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you go just straight on evidence, it's easy to say that she was the victim. Christina was the victim, and what Zach did was horrible and wrong, and he should be punished. But then when you hear the outside, all the things that were going on the outside, then that's where your mind kind of changes a little bit. You're like, well, it wasn't great what he did. It wasn't right what he did, but you can kind of understand why he did it. He just did it in the wrong way. That's, again, we can't have a vigilante society,
Right. And I just want to clarify too, Abe said in the chat, I still haven't seen any evidence she was actually abusing her daughter yet. She was. I don't know if Abe maybe just kind of popped in, but she was. We were told in court some very disturbing examples of just a small fraction of the photos and videos that showed Christina's direct involvement on video in the child abuse. So yeah, a lot of people don't know that because that was off camera and that wasn't something that was reported in the news widely, unless you were just there live tweeting it. Like, I don't think our local news even told about that testimony that was off the stream, but no, it's not disputed. And the investigator on the stand admitted, we found out after, but she was very much, not only producing, but distributing. So to me, my theory is they were selling this. And then they told some of the file names that this stuff was under based on whatever they were doing, and just disturbing. Yeah. So she was 100% involved, and not a question.
Yeah. That's a shame. So then I go back, I asked initially about Tina, then I go back to Tina. Do you think, since they were all living together, is Tina, are her hands clean in this? I know that's speculation, but what do you think? Or can we talk about that?
No, for me, it's like, I think a lot, if, and it's hard because a lot of the stuff isn't public. I kind of put two and two together, and it maybe seems like most of it was happening at Bradley Post's house. But I hate to say yay or nay. I really hate to say yay because I just know with my interaction with her, she's going about this as her sister was brutally murdered. She's dealing with that emotion. At the bond hearing, interestingly enough, she had a Diet Dr. Pepper. If you go back and watch the bond hearing up on the seal, that was Christina's favorite drink. She hates, Tina hates Diet Dr. Pepper, but she's just that sister that is wanting justice for her sister. She never really talked about the abuse to me when I had conversations with her. And obviously during both of those victim impact statements, never broached the subject. So I don't know. I would like to think if that's your niece and you knew, you would raise the red flag.
Sure.
So,
yeah. And again, that's speculation.
It is total speculation.
Just kind of thinking that if they're all under the same household, is there anything?
It seems to me this really mainly happened at Bradley Post's house, though. If I'm kind of digesting what bits and pieces I've heard about it.
Sure.
So that could be she just had no clue.
Sure. Here's a great question, because we found out after Zach, I think it was his first day of testimony, Grace said, hey, did you read her post? She was a reply. Let me get to this question from Drunky the Bear. Do we know if there was essay with Grace, the adopted sister?
Never heard that. Yeah. Clearly there was some issues there. I know I heard a rumor, which that she called the solicitor's office the day Zach testified. and was very upset with his portrayal of her. And I know she did make a post on social media somewhere, but we never really heard, we just really heard Zach's side of the story of his adopted sister and not hers. I would love to have her come on and tell it. But so we never heard. We just heard really that she, according to Zach, was disturbed and caused a lot of chaos in the family. But yeah, I never heard anything about any kind of abuse. Zach actually said the opposite, that he was raised in a very loving home and had a great childhood. And clearly there were some issues with the adopted kids with the issue, the things that were unresolved with them that this family had to deal with, which 5 kids, that all have trauma. It just had to be such a change in so many ways for them, but not a fan of his sister or his adopted sister for sure. But yeah, I heard she called the solicitor's office.
The post that the thing that she posted was on, it was on the competitor. It was Court TV, their YouTube. I have it here, and she definitely said, this never happened. What's wrong with you? It was your parents that ripped me away from the family and all this. So I guess it was too late for the solicitor to call her in, right? If they had known a little bit earlier, I guess they would have called her in. But it was like at the very end of the trial, I think like the last day or the second to last day.
Yeah. So he, that was the day before closings when he testified. And, she reached out to the solicitor and was like, whoa, hold up. And that's hard because if, people have their own memories and their own perceptions of the past, maybe somewhere in the middle there, the truth is to be found. But it must be hard if you're watching a trial that's your adopted brother and then he spends 15, 20 minutes, calling you soulless and a vampire that sucks the light. I'd probably make some calls too if I felt they were misrepresenting me.
I know, right?
I think she wanted to get on that stand.
Sure. Therapist, says, what other things did we not get to see that might help bring clarity?
Even some things that weren't in the trial, but like John Mello sent me, just showing that he really did make a very pointed effort to get this investigated and nothing happened, which goes back to that original, we could talk about it all day and say, did he do a good thing in the end by saving this kid? Or do we just, have to say full stop, you can't do this. Right. That was such a big thing for me, is seeing things from John Mello's perspective, but off the camera, really the biggest thing was just that confirmation that Christina was directly involved in this. And hearing what these other witnesses would have testified to, like for the guardian, when they proffered her off camera, they only asked, what was your recommendation of where you were going to place the kid? Well, with Christina, or give her a favorable and give Mello an unfavorable. But then they don't let but I would have obviously afterwards said, no, she needs to be out of that house immediately. Other than really just learning some details that confirmed her involvement, there wasn't a whole lot off camera that was really explosive. Just your typical, the big motion hearing about whether or not this came in was interesting. The defense is saying, look, this is his defense. He has a right to defend himself, and he can't do it if he can't tell the truth of why he did what he did that justified in his mind, which he was going for that defense of others. Which is, he essentially takes on self-defense in place of the child. Right. And, one of the big arguments was the child wasn't at home. She wasn't in imminent danger. She was at school. And then the defense is like, so we just let her go home and wait to be molested. That's really his whole point, is to stop this for her. So the back and forth with the state and the defense over that issue of bringing it in, clearly prosecution didn't want it in for all the reasons. And, I've talked to some attorneys who don't feel he'll be very successful appealing this decision because the evidence wasn't found till after. So it's just interesting to me, the arguments that we heard off camera about why it shouldn't be let in and why it should. There was a big fight over it. And every time that phone was mentioned, we would get back into it. But other than the confirmation, there wasn't a whole lot that you guys didn't hear. And just the proffer of the witnesses who all kind of followed the same theme of what they would have testified to, which is, hey, we knew this was going on after she was killed because we found it. And I would have detailed finding this stuff on the devices. Even with Bradley Post, he hung out. There's some cigar bars in downtown Greenville. Christina's dad owns one, not right in downtown, but they even found stuff in his locker there.
Yeah.
Where your regulars have lockers and they keep their cigars in there. And, he's stashing this stuff. It was 9 days after the murder where he had time to get rid of stuff. And literally the investigator thought in hindsight, he's deleting photos off his phone, standing in the driveway 10 minutes after finding her.
Right.
So, I think the full scope of the number of files, I guess to me would be the biggest thing off camera, which is this was not a 1 or 2 time thing.
No.
This was repeated over the course of a few years, and it was horrific. So I think that if you want to understand it, the best thing to understand is the dirtiest victim I've ever seen.
Yeah. My notes have 16,000. I think it was 16,000 that, or over 16,000 or 16. Yeah, 16,000 plus. 16, plus.
Yeah. I mean, it's huge. Very much a very in-depth abuse case. So that was really the biggest thing to me is the how big it was.
Yeah.
To understand your victim.
Sure. Do you think all 16,000 is from the daughter, or do you think it expands?
It's a combination of the daughter, another minor, and animals. So, she worked at a vet clinic. From what I understand, she was bringing fosters home on the weekend. And because I've never found that she owned a dog. So all that was seen by investigators. That's why Bradley Post has the buggery charge. That's another word for that here in South Carolina.
Sure.
Just the sheer number of it. This was not a sporadic thing or a lot of time in between thing. It was constant.
Yeah. That's that just like you said, just hits you in your soul and your core and just makes you feel the depravity of human beings is sometimes astounding to me. I like to cover trials because I like to see the depravity of the human mind. But this one just takes it to a whole nother level. Yeah,
that's just a whole other area that disturbs me to my core. And somebody said here, Cat Ride, Post may have more victims, no doubt. He's older. I think he's in his 70s, maybe. People don't start doing it to that level for the first time. So I'm curious to see if more people come forward about him. This is a federal trial for Bradley Post. It won't be streamed if he goes to trial. For me, I feel like just plead guilty, save the victims in this case, from having to testify. They've got you on camera doing horrible things to children, so I'm not sure he'll take it to trial. The attorney general is prosecuting him, John Mello, the solicitor's office, not a federal trial. So, I'm interested to see too, does he just bow out and just go away forever? But no doubt, probably a predator from, early ages would be my guess, just due to how egregious this stuff was.
Agreed. And then Sel asked, what would have been the right way for Hughes to approach this when the father and authorities did not act or couldn't achieve to protect her?
That's a good question. And that's one I'm just asking myself nonstop. If I were, let's just say I was in his shoes, I think I would have marched to the door and been like, hey, we know what you're doing with your daughter. We know what's up. And I would have tried to have went about it that way. If the authorities aren't going to help me, then I went to the source. We don't know if John Mello ever really, we don't know what was said between him and Christina regarding the suspected abuse, but with Zach, this is just somebody from the outside. You don't know, literally never met until he's killing her. But I think for me, I would have just went there and tried to scare the fool out of them and say, we know what's up and we're going to get it one day to where you're going to get busted. Maybe that would have been the right way to go. But unfortunately, with these kind of cases, you do have to have proof. It seems to be the go-to in a lot of custody cases where the parent will just accuse the other of the worst and hope that that works in their favor, whether it's valid or not. I've covered cases where it was proven to be a lie. But in this case, it wasn't. And so for me, that's kind of the thing is, unfortunately, a lot of these child protective services, they are understaffed. They do the best they can with the caseloads they have. And I think, just as a whole, we don't really have the resources to throw somebody on this case 24/7 until they figure out there's proof. It's just, So for me, I guess, I'd have just went up and been like, you're nasty. You're a predator. We know what's up and we are going to get you.
Yeah. I would think that they would have been able to bring in the daughter at some point for an interview in a
They
safe environment.
They
Right.
did at a
Mhm.
local sexual assault center that offers like trauma counseling or
Mhm.
forensic interviews with children. So
Mhm.
my understanding is she did
Mhm.
verify that. I believe it revolved around the sleeping arrangements and the fact that there may have been no PJs involved.
Mhm.
That was what I heard.
Mhm.
But the daughter was interviewed,
Mhm.
by that center. But still, even then, if her statement wasn't consistent, that could have
Mhm.
been why that wasn't, we don't know because she's a minor and we won't have access to that transcript. But and
Yeah.
then she was going to be called as a defense witness. She was going to be the first defense witness on the stand.
Mhm.
When they made that decision, it couldn't come in.
Mhm.
That day they argued about putting her up there. I thought that would be the way they kind of backdoor this in, is
Sure.
through her as a victim and
Mhm.
saying, "Hey, I love Zach. He was good to me. Yes, I was a victim of my mom and Bradley Post."
Mhm.
But so she was going to testify in Zach's defense, which we all had heard rumblings over the weekend that the defense had prepped her.
Mhm.
But with that not coming in, it didn't
Wow.
do anything. But she was willing. So
Right. Can you
that
imagine? Can you imagine if she got up on the stand and said, "I love my mom, but I'm glad that Zach did what he did."
I can tell you this: from everything I've heard from people that know them, she does not love her mom.
Mm.
And understandably so. I don't think that,
Yeah.
clearly there has to be a lot of conflicting emotion of what was done to you at the hands of your mother and her fiance, and
Right.
then losing your mom that way. But from my understanding, she just is happy without her mom, and for all the
Mhm.
right reasons. Clearly, the abuse by her mom and Bradley Post is over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think she would have probably come across, if I've heard everything about her this correct. She might have blown that jury away with her poise.
Mhm. Yeah, I think she's what, she was 9 then, and that was 6
She's
years
not quite
ago?
13.
Or yeah.
So I did ask because I have a daughter who's 13 and I knew they
Mhm.
were sort of around the same age. She's,
Mhm.
I think she'll be 13 later in the summer,
Yeah.
but clearly one of those kids that just would be able to hold their own, probably on cross exam from everything
Mhm.
I've heard about her.
Sure. Well, like Zach has said, she traveled to Italy. She is a world traveler, if you will. They went to art museums together, so she's cultured, or she's had that. Her father, as you mentioned before, was pretty big in the music industry, so she's probably hung out with some of those people that you mentioned, and that makes you grow up. And then, unfortunately, adding to the fact that she may have been abused, I think that makes you grow up as well. So,
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you lose your childhood
yeah.
when those things are done to you. As horrible as it is, you
Mhm.
can't just go back to being a kid.
No.
And
Yeah.
and in so many ways, her mom's dead, dad's in jail, very well facing life in prison. So,
Mhm.
her burden is heavy, the
Yeah,
heaviest of all.
absolutely. I wanted to ask you this question earlier, but Drunky the Bear brought it up. What do you and others at the trial think of Zach's chances of a successful appeal?
I think the judge allowed so much stuff to go on the record off the
Mhm.
live stream, just
Mhm.
to preserve the record. I've heard a couple of attorneys say, yeah, this could get turned around on appeal because
Mhm.
he can't defend himself without his defense. On
Right.
the other hand, I've heard attorneys say it wasn't proven until after the murder, so he went in there and murdered her on a suspicion. What if
Mhm.
he'd have been wrong? And
Yeah.
what if this was just John Mello wanting his daughter without the abuse aspect?
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously at the press conference, the only thing the defense said is we are going to appeal.
Mhm.
But whether they're successful or not, it's just, even if it were successful, I just feel like, I don't know though. I think you would have had a holdout.
Mhm.
Had it all come in the way the defense wanted it to, not by just his admission, because it still leaves it open ended,
Mhm.
to an extent of how in depth she was with the abuse.
Mhm.
We'll see. Look,
Yeah.
I mean, like I say, I'm so conflicted about Zach. He
Mhm.
was so poised every morning. He would come in, nod his head to the people that were there for him, very
Mhm.
articulate. I thought he'd come off very, very cold on the stand.
Mhm.
When you're describing something like that,
Mhm.
no emotion whatsoever. So to me, I think he still feels, that was the right thing to do.
Sure.
And that was a little that bothered me a bit because look, even if I kill somebody in a self-defense, I'm probably going to sob every time I
Mhm.
talk about it because you're entering into a dimension of a different kind of human once you commit murder, whether
Yeah.
it's justified or not. So I think that rubs some of the jury the wrong way when you're describing it, and it's just very matter of fact. There's no emotion, no regret, no remorse, and I'm sure that was something that the jury, probably talked about back there. Some people said he really came across as sort of I know everything you don't. I'm a narcissist. I did this because of this, this, and this, and there were a lot of mixed opinions about him on the stand. I thought he did a good job, to be honest. There were times where you felt almost convinced by what he was saying, but that's also with us having the knowledge of stuff the jury didn't, of specifics of what had been done. So for me, that's where I'm still trying to figure it out in my head of how I really feel. And I think this is one of those cases where everything you feel is probably right because it's so odd and there's so many moving parts that this is not a typical murder case. Not that there ever is one.
Yeah.
But there's just so many elements here that there's no good character in this whole story except for the kid.
Right. It's not cut and dry. Like a lot of times there'll be a domestic violence thing, where somebody's drunk or stoned or whatever, and they do that, this or that. This was not black and white. It was not cut and dry, very complicated. A lot of moving parts, like you said, a lot of layers that we have to continue to dig through. The story is not over.
No, it's not. And I tell you, let's see. John Mello has his preliminary schedule for April 25th. I'll be there for that, but he should have another bond hearing in circuit court before then. He's not going to get it. These are violent charges. He will not get bond. He's a flight risk. He's a dual citizen of Italy. So I think he'll be in. I'm just curious to see if he waives his right to a speedy trial or says, let's go. Let's do it. I need to get out of here, get back with my kid. I just think John Mello has a much better chance at getting acquitted or at least a hung jury. Based on his story, of his intimate knowledge of his daughter and knowing something wasn't right. And this jury may see the dad as just like, hey, you did everything. You even got her out of the country and the mom wanted her back. Right. So I think it's just going to be a very different trial than Zachary Hughes for a lot of reasons. And I'm very interested to see how this plays out.
Yeah. If Zach does win appeal, how will you feel about that?
I wouldn't be mad, but it's because I just feel like if you are going to take the stand as a defendant, which as we know is very rare, and admit to the murder on the stand, which is even more rare, you should be able to bring in your mind, why were you doing what you were doing that day? Because then to the jury, you just look like a psychopath that just, had he never even mentioned the child abuse, the jury's going to be like, but why?
Right.
What the motive? Made you do this? Yeah. So for me, I just feel like if you have a defense and it involves something that your victim did willingly, then that's just what you're going to have to work against, because I do think it was his right to say, I bonded with this kid. He was telling me things. We don't know if the girl told him something. We just don't know if they had that conversation between Zach, Mello, and the kid. So maybe Zach heard firsthand things from that child. We don't know. But I wouldn't be mad. Because I'd be curious to see what a jury does. Not that I think you should be free, but because I think that you should be able to defend yourself with the actual reason you did what you did. Otherwise, you kind of feel like they're tying both hands behind his back where he's trying to explain this, but really can't explain it.
But can't. Exactly. Yeah. I think, well, we know that appeals take a while, right? Even if he goes to appeal, it's going to be like 2 years, 3 years before it even gets in front of anybody.
It's not going to be a priority for these courts coming off a verdict.
Yeah. So he's going to be spending time. He already has spent time since this happened. So time served and all that stuff. How do you think he'll be portrayed or viewed in prison now?
He is going to be a hero because that's, there are certain things in prison, and I've talked to a lot of people. I've talked to lifers. I've talked to people who did little hops and short stays and, just a little weekend vacay. And the thing that people in prison hate, men or women prisons, people that abuse kids physically or sexually, and elderly people. Those are two areas that pretty much every inmate, no matter who you're affiliated with, can agree on. You are the worst of the worst. So people like Zach Hughes who take care of somebody like that, it's different than if he had on the opposite end of the spectrum, Bradley Post probably would need to be in solitary the rest of his life because people like him get killed. People like Zach, hey man, you did a good job. Don't hurt the kids. There are plenty of people in prison who have hurt kids, but for the most part, That's just one area that you are very unforgiving. And the biggest thing I've heard, for people like Bradley Post that will eventually go to prison for this, don't lie about why you're there, because these guards will give inmates heads up. He's lying. He abused children.
Yeah.
Bradley Post going to have a much harder time in prison. Zach Hughes probably will have a pretty fat commissary account from people on the outside who feel like, hey, you saved a kid. Good job. Let me buy you some honey buns.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like a real life Dexter, if you will.
Yeah, really. Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Sadly, he could possibly do it again, though. I think that's my conflict, where I don't agree with what he did by any stretch of the imagination, but more and more that we talk and more that comes out that Christina and Post were not good people. But then would he do it again? So he does need to be in prison because he would do it again, but what he did isn't so bad. I don't know. It's like you said, it's very conflicting.
It is. It's, because I don't hate Zach Hughes. I just, but you have that whole law thing. Can't go around stabbing people 30 something times and be free because, like I say, let's just say the next person isn't going to be in his crosshairs if he feels like you're not a good person.
Yep. So, or Mello says, hey, this person did me wrong. Zach, nudge, nudge, go take him out,
Yeah. And whether or not it was, hey, will you do this? Clearly no money exchanged. We never heard any proof of that. But, if he cared for that kid and really was, being told a lot of stuff by John Mello we never heard about, it kind of makes sense, I guess, maybe just felt very protective of her in a big brother way. Hey, let me step in because nothing you've been doing through the right means has been successful. Do I hate them for sending out the photos of Christina? I would have, but not in this case. Because at what point do you just give up and say, all right, she'll have to be a victim? I can't do anything. I can't get the law to, I think you kind of go into panic mode and you think, how can I just make her look bad? How can I get the courts to say, we need to listen to him? I don't hate them for that. And that's, for me, that's one of the worst things you can do to a man or a woman is private photos start getting passed around to your dad's business, to neighbors, to people that have kids. But
just the worst of the worst.
It's just that, other tentacle of this case.
That
normally I would say, whoa, but I'm like,
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Can you hang out for a little bit longer, or do you need to go in?
I'm good. Yeah, no,
okay.
I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to need to go to take a comfort break.
Okay, cool.
So I'm going to dip out for just a few. If you want to talk, great. I can take you off the stage. What do you want to do?
I'll sing karaoke. Yeah, that's cool. I'll take a little comfort break too.
Okay. All right. We'll see you in a bit. Cool. All right. We are back. Thank you, chat, for indulging us in our little comfort break there. So just to recap, we are talking to Gigi of Pretty Lies and Alibis, and we are talking about the trial of Zachary David Hughes, and he is known now for the deletion of Christina in South Carolina. So Gigi was at the trial. She was posting. She was in the courtroom the whole trial, and she was posting and doing posting on Twitter, on X, and she was also posting on her YouTube page, which is Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's see. Do we have any questions? If you guys have any questions, go ahead and do a QQQ or something like that, so that we can see them, and we'll pull them up as we go along. I still have quite a few questions for Gigi, so let's see. How do you guys feel about Zach? I know we took a couple polls when we were doing our stream. What did you guys think about Zach overall? I know some of you thought that what he did was wrong, what he did was right. I think we kind of all sort of in the same boat. You ready, Gigi?
Okay. Comfort break means more coffee, so I'm all set.
Welcome back. I if I was a juror, I'd be like, Judge.
Oh yeah, no, me. Yeah,
because I like to drink water,
Same. Well, the coffee, it's I'd have to have a catheter if I was a juror.
Right. So that brings me to the next question. What did you do then during the trial? Because you're sitting there. Were you able to check out, or did you have to wait for the judge to get breaks?
Only during closings, openings and closings, you couldn't come in, go out. If you went out, you were out. I never left. But we had the lunches were generous, hour and a half, hour 45. So I live 10 minutes from the courthouse, and my grandmother, who's 90, lives off and on with me, and she was here that week. So I was able to run home, make sure she was good, go right back to the courthouse, get there in plenty of time. But, people really didn't move much. I mean, there were, people that arrived late, but if you were in there, you were kind of laser focused because you knew what was going on behind the scenes. And so we were all just kind of waiting for that shoe to drop, for it to come out somehow. So, and also just to get a little more insight, because not a lot about actual motive or details from the crime scene, aside from the number of stab wounds or sharp force injuries and the rose petals, we really didn't know a whole lot. So they did show a little bit of body cam footage, which you guys saw on the stream, and that was all very interesting. But yeah, no, I mean, we were able to leave and come back if we needed to during testimony.
Sure. Okay. Speaking of the body cam, so we saw what was his name? Robinson, right? First responder, Deputy Chris Robinson. Black Crowes reference there.
Yeah.
We saw him
handle.
Yeah. We saw him walking in, and then obviously he discovers Christina. What was your first impression when you saw that crime scene, or did they actually show that?
They did. So we saw a few pictures of her on the floor in a pool of blood. Didn't look posed. We'd heard her body may have been posed. It really wasn't. It looked like she, you could see the drag marks, and then her hands were kind of up, and one leg was sort of bent. Large pool of blood under the couch. So, clearly you could see the fight sort of progressed, it seems to me, throughout the kitchen, into the living room, and then eventually drug her. And those drag marks, I saw those in the Pike County massacre. And it's just, it's so weird to see, because you just know, like, how do you feel when you're dragging somebody you just killed? So I think, for me, it was just, you could almost see the struggle in your head.
Absolutely. So we were looking at, I took screenshots and I would pull them up for our chat to see. So there was a pillow, right? You have the couch, which was blue, right? Then you had the table. Then there was what we discovered was a pillow. It was like a bright orange pillow.
Yeah.
So where do you think, so the largest pool of blood, because I'm trying to figure out what the sequence was. So the largest pool of blood was underneath the couch. And the ME thought that that's where the jugular, I guess that's where that happened.
Yeah, the jugular and the carotid on the right side.
Okay. So then she made her way to the window, and then he dragged her back. What do you think?
I kind of think, honestly, maybe towards the end, because even if you get the jugular and the carotid, it takes a little time to bleed out. But I think
Mhm,
that's probably where they ended up, and maybe the couch. It didn't look to be like some really heavy couch. It's probably one of
mhm,
those you could just push with one hand if you needed to sweep under it.
mhm,
But I think maybe that couch just got moved, and that is the location. He got those two
mhm,
arteries or the veins or whatever.
mhm,
Um, because you could just see the progression, little blood drops on the floor where maybe some of these more superficial injuries were leaking out a bit. But
mhm.
yeah, my theory is just they ended up on that couch on the floor. That got pushed aside in the struggle, and that's where those two came. And then you saw those drag marks
Mhm.
going from there to that front room.
So that's where she was found, was away from the couch. He didn't drag her towards the couch, he dragged her away from the couch.
Yeah, so I think it's like a sitting area. It's like a
Uh-huh.
front window.
Mhm,
So it's kinda like a little foyer sitting area,
mhm.
and I think he moved her away from that actually, so that couch was
Right.
in the sitting area, I believe. So
Ah,
that
okay.
struggle, maybe she was trying to get to the door,
Mhm.
obviously, it's right there,
Sure.
and then that's just when the fatal stabbing occurred, or at
Mhm,
least the wounds that would have killed her, because those were the only 2 really, I think,
mhm.
that would have killed her or quickly, were
Right,
those
right.
2. So maybe she almost got to the door, and that's when he knew, like, "I gotta do the," and he said that at that point, he was like, "I just have to get this done."
Right,
Um,
right.
Clearly she fought him, and I'm sure he was hesitant, like he said. I don't have any reason to think he was lying, that it was hard for him.
Mhm.
You got adrenaline going, you're probably not thinking in the moment of things you thought you would do when you were planning it.
Of
So
course.
my theory is she just got close to running outside and screaming.
Sure. Now, I'm just looking at the diagram. So so it was her left side, so right-handed. So he's doing this. So he got her here, here, and here. So that's a
Mhm.
right hand.
Yep.
And then he got her on this side. So that I think she was turned around and he got her from behind, right? Because how would you get somebody if you're left-handed? That's just an awkward,
And it could be
you know
too,
what I'm
if
saying?
they're on the floor and he's
Hmm.
stabbing her, did she turn her head?
Yeah.
Did she kind
Yeah.
of maybe she did have that one broken fingernail.
Hmm.
I don't know if they maybe one or so on the hand, but
Hmm.
for me it just looked like the majority of the bleeding out. And you think about it too, to kind of come around, it's just going to be awkward.
Hmm.
I think she was on the ground, and I think
Hmm.
that she might have been thrashing about trying to get away, and then he's just at that point just kind of
Yeah.
going hard.
Yeah.
So, maybe, but then on the very side of the couch, you did see a blood stain, so he could have
Hmm.
got her standing up. It's a
Hmm.
good question, actually. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. I tend to go there because I need
Yeah,
to know what happened.
right.
Any
Yeah,
trial that we go through, I'm always trying to figure out, okay, the person was found here. I kind of wish they would do a chalk outline and at least show us that, like
yeah.
where did the person end up? Because then you can kind of, because right
Mhm.
now Todd Mullis, he's going through his post conviction relief trial, and we watched it. We did a rewatch of it, and we're just trying to figure out how on earth does a corn rake get into this woman's body from these different angles, and
Oh, yeah.
just fascinating. It's just
Mhm.
fascinating. So
It really is, but I
um,
think in the heat of the moment, things just happen, and I think, at
yeah,
that point, he's probably just like, "Gotta," "She gotta go."
yeah, yeah.
He's at the point now to where it would be attempted murder if she got away, probably a host of other charges. So, and he
Hmm.
said that. He was like, he was worried a neighbor may show up. When you're
Hmm.
doing it, you probably think you're being a lot louder than you actually are. That was the reason
Hmm.
he didn't use the gun.
Yeah,
And of course, it wasn't even loaded, but
right, right,
which kind of was bizarre to me. And why would you even bring it?
right.
Why would you bring an unloaded gun to a murder? But he had the
Yeah,
knife. So,
right.
yeah, he bought that at a gun show
Hmm.
with the gun a month before.
Hmm. Yeah.
So he was planning this for a while.
Yeah, one of our mods asked in our chat while we were watching the trial about if he was so concerned about a neighbor not finding him, what would have happened if the daughter came home and found her mom? I mean, did he clearly he didn't think that through,
No, I don't think
right?
so, and, I believe, she was at an age where her mom was taking her and picking her up.
Hmm.
So but, yeah, I mean, and that was a good point by the prosecution. Had Tina or Bradley Poe showed up, would this have been a double homicide? Because at that point, what do you do?
Yeah.
Now, granted, they didn't know him, but,
Hmm.
eventually, it's just you don't want any witnesses to your crime, and that's a good
Hmm.
question. I think, had somebody come up, he probably would have went at them too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if it's the daughter, what if it's the daughter coming home?
Yeah,
You know?
I don't think he would have hurt her.
Yeah.
He killed for her, but
Right.
I think if you get an adult who pops up in there and
Hmm.
is seeing what you're doing, then you're gonna be
Yep.
number 2.
Yep, exactly. This is a good question by Abe. Oops, no, I'm sorry. Well, I'll read it anyway. Zach killed a woman because X told him to, and it's impossibly naive. I actually, sorry, Abe, I didn't want to bring that one up, but I'll read it anyway. Okay, this one is from Yorkie. Do you think he would have done better with a bench trial?
I don't. I
Yeah.
just think that, even if the judge knew, you just have the egregious factor of how she was killed in spite of who she was as a person alive, which
Hmm.
is horrible. I think just, if you follow the law, it's there. I mean, malice is 35 stab wounds or sharp force injuries. I don't think he would have done better. You have to
Hmm.
go with the jury because he knew he was gonna get on that stand and say it. His
Hmm.
prayer was that one person would at least hold out, and he
Yeah.
would get a hung jury, fight this coming
Hmm.
in time for your second trial, take it to a higher court. There
Hmm.
was a lot of drama, pre-trial where he was refusing to give his PIN to his phone, saying that he forgot.
Hmm.
There
After
were
he memorized 600 pages, 32 sonatas, but he couldn't remember his password. Yeah, that was a big deal.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, and they were like, "Oh, it's jail stress," and I'm like, "Mhm." You
Yeah.
can memorize 45 minutes of sheet music, some of the hardest in the world to play, but,
Mhm.
yeah, so, there were also all those WhatsApp messages they didn't find. So
Mhm.
what were on those, we'll never know.
Right. And what was the conversations? What were the, because at one point, I think right after he said, how did the music lesson go? And he said, went well, I'll tell you on the phone. So
Right.
what were the verbal conversations? We will never know. It's just
Yeah.
between those two.
And I
Mhm.
tell you too, once he got the words out of his mouth about the
Mhm.
money,
Mhm.
he offered me 5,000. I said, no. He offered me 10,000. I said, I'll do it if I think it's a just cause. Like 3 or 4 investigators immediately got up and went out of that courtroom, and they were going to get that warrant for him. He was arrested at home.
Mhm.
He probably watching the trial.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I would almost guarantee it, but it was interesting because we thought when that came out, we were all wondering, is he going to throw John Mello on under the bus on the stand?
Mhm.
And I said, man, he isn't so far. I
Mhm.
mean, in my mind, I thought, well, if he was going to do it, he would have done it a while ago to help his case.
Right.
But man, when he did, we were all like, "Oh, there it is, there it is." And then you see the investigators going, we were like, "It is on. We're going to a bond hearing tonight. We're there."
Nice. Do you think that Hughes is going to testify against Mello?
The solicitor touched on that in the press conference where somebody asked him that question. He said, "Look, I have Zachary Hughes under oath
Mhm.
saying this. It's in the transcript."
Yeah.
Essentially, he didn't need him at that point.
Right.
Even if and maybe Zach will, but
Mhm.
what does he have to gain?
Mhm.
Not much, but if he is going to get ticked off at Mello as he sits and realizes and it sinks in, he's a lifer.
Mhm.
And does he start to think, look, man, I could have just been sailing the South Pacific playing piano for a bunch of rich people, and now I'm in the
Mhm.
pokey for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
Could he get bitter and really get up there and tell maybe even stuff he didn't tell on the stand? I think it's entirely possible.
Sure. Sure. Capri Law says that Mello was watching. He said that to another YouTuber.
Okay, yeah, I
So he
figured he
was.
was. He was very, and what's funny is we heard throughout the trial that the emails that he would send were from this Proton
Mhm.
host site. He
Yep.
tried to be impersonating a lawyer, doing all this stuff. The
Yeah.
morning he got arrested at 8:38 a.m., I got an email from Proton Mail that
Ah.
was a forward of an email between him and an investigator. He didn't
Ah.
sign his name. I think
Uh-huh.
the name was Angry Secretary or something like that. It was something very random.
All right.
But I'm sitting there and Zach Hughes is on the stand, and I
Mhm.
get this email notification, and I show Fitz News, Jen Wood. I'm like,
Mhm.
look, Proton. She's like, oh, that's so mellow.
Nice. Let's see. Do you want to? Okay, I was just going to kind of go through the days. We've really talked about a lot of the days, but in comparison, okay, day one, there were 14 witnesses. Now, in comparison, we're covering Monica Sementili, and they go through, I think we're on like witness 30, and it's like day 5,000.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Go
just brutal.
figure.
So I thought, okay, they had all the neighbors. What did you think about the neighbors? Did you find them, I guess, credible? How can a neighbor not be? I mean, they have nothing to win or lose. They're just up there telling their story. Although Donna Gorman, what do you think about Donna Gorman?
I don't know how credible the jury found her. It was a good point. The defense is saying, look, I mean, even by the state's own evidence, Zach wasn't there for an hour.
Mhm.
And then the prosecution said, well, we kind of think maybe he hid under the house,
Yeah.
based on where his phone was last registering to a tower.
Mhm.
Um, but it is true. 3 years have passed. There have been documentaries on this case on the true crime networks. It's been on our local news, obviously.
Mhm.
Um, but you really didn't need her testimony, to be honest, because you had the guy on ring camera and he got
Mhm.
up on the stand and told that was him.
Yeah.
So if she didn't have a dog in the fight, I'm with you. I don't think she would have lied, but it makes you wonder, do you kind of remember things after the fact when you
Mhm.
hear more details and it was in your neighborhood? Greenville is
Yeah.
a big biking town. We have a huge population here that do the road bikes and those kind of bikes. We have great trails and mountain biking just 20 minutes away or city biking right through downtown. So it's
Mhm.
not uncommon to see people on bikes everywhere around here.
Mhm.
Neighborhoods, even on the side of the road on major roads. And so whether or not she saw Zach Hughes, it's just the defense is like, no, it was an hour later. There's no way she could have seen him.
Right. And yet, Mr. Wilkins, during his closing, he said Miss Gorman pinned out Hughes. Like he didn't solicit that, or he wasn't. I guess he said he didn't know that she was going to say that. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
and she wasn't even shown a picture of Zach until just recently,
Yeah.
probably when they were prepping her for her testimony. But it was, yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things. Do you just remember a little more? But at the same time,
Mhm.
I mean, I can look out my window and within 5 minutes, I'm going to see three people on a bike go down, and they may stop in front of my house and take a drink, and
Mhm.
so I mean, but at the same time, maybe she did, and maybe
Mhm.
he did hide because I'm sitting here thinking John Mello knew the schedules that day to an extent, and that was one of the other things that got him arrested.
Mhm.
But it's not an exact science. So she had an interview. Well, how do you know when she's going to exactly be home? How do you know she doesn't go run an errand? So I
Right.
feel like he probably was in the area for a bit before,
Mhm.
because he had to make sure Tina was gone. He probably wanted to make sure he saw her leave or at least was able to ride by or something and see the car was there and then it wasn't.
Mhm.
But I do think he had to have been waiting
Yeah.
somewhere at some point. But with the phone being off, or in airplane mode, you'll never know. And
Mhm.
he never said.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think if you're pulling into your driveway and you see some random bike in your front lawn, you're going to be like, "What's that doing here?" So he must have parked it in that little port or whatever, that little alcove that they talked about, or he must have put
Yeah.
it somewhere
Yeah,
off of the
that's my
street.
theory
Yeah.
because, he has a rough outline, but,
Yeah.
can you think about how brazen this was though? And that's
Mhm.
one of the things. You got somebody over in Italy telling you, "Well, here's the schedule for today." So we
Mhm.
know that probably either Christina herself told Mello, "Hey, I have a job interview tomorrow," or the daughter may
Mhm.
have said, "Mom's got a job interview for a
Right.
part-time job in the morning after she takes me to school." And
Right.
then Mello may, obviously convey that to Zach, but you're going into a
Mhm.
neighborhood you're not familiar with. You're
Mhm.
going to kill a woman you've never met. You
Mhm.
don't know who could be home.
Mhm.
Who's to say Bradley Post didn't spend the night there
Mhm.
and she drove him. It goes back to that brazenness of the crime that really I think for me is the heart of why the guilty verdict was appropriate.
Yeah.
Um, he kind of went on a wing and a prayer that he would get her home, and he was right that he did. But what a
Mhm.
huge chance! That's a gamble.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think she got home at 9:12, and then he showed up at 9:15. It was like
He was watching. He
3
had
minute
to have been.
difference. Yeah.
Yep, no
Yeah.
doubt.
This is a really great question from Fala. How has finding out about Post affected the area you live in?
Oh man, it's this whole crime from day one's been so shocking, not only just with the brutality of the murder, but then the twists and turns that came.
Mhm.
I've read what people would like to see happen to Bradley Post, and I'll just say pretty much everybody in the area would take a turn.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's also a reminder that these things happen right here. Greenville is a big city, it's becoming a big city, but we still have that small town feel where there's so many generational families that somebody who knows everybody.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I've met people that knew Bradley Post that weren't surprised. They always thought he had a creepy factor. And then
Mhm.
some people who were like, "Oh my gosh, like, I mean, he was a little weird, but we never thought this." So I
Yeah.
think not only people that knew him and Christina as well, because right after she was killed, you're hearing from coworkers, you're hearing from people that were customers at the vet clinic. She was amazing, always made you laugh, you
Mhm.
know. And then after all this came out, it was like crickets. Nobody spoke up good or bad about her.
Yeah.
But I think it was a good reminder to parents or caregivers or people that have custody of kids that, you imagine this other minor and they end up and send a deputy to this minor's house to tell the parents, look, we're investigating this murder. We found out your kid's a victim. And when she was going to spend the night with these people, she was being molested. And I think that just drives home that we have to be so vigilant and watch our kid for cues. And some kids will suppress it and go on about normal. There's been so many crazy studies that blow my mind about suppression of these events. And they don't think about it until that trigger. And maybe when you're 30. In South Carolina, the statute of limitations, as far as I can gather, doesn't begin until, let's say this happened to you when you were 10 and you remember it at 20 or 25. When you report it then, that's when your statute of limitations. It's like a delayed trauma response or something. But can you imagine those parents thinking, oh, she's going over to play with her friend, and then boom, your child's been a victim of one of the worst things you can do to a kid.
Yeah.
So I think it's just, for me as a mother, I mean, I have 19, almost 18, and then a 13-year-old. The middle's a boy, and then I have an older and younger daughter. It terrifies me because these are people that you wouldn't look at Christina and say, my gosh, she is one of the worst kind of predators.
Yeah.
So it's also a reminder that you have to be vigilant, not only about the people that give you the creeps, but also the people that everybody is unfortunate, but you have to be cautious with everybody.
I know.
That has access to your child.
Yeah. Yeah. Sad state of affairs that we're in right now.
It really is. And I think the internet has really fueled this kind of stuff, because back, in the 70s, 80s, you'd have friends who had VCR tapes of this stuff. Now you just go on the dark web and it's like a store, and it's petrifying. I just feel, I've always thought, has it always been this bad? Or is it really just getting worse with the avenues we have to further this stuff? I really do think the internet just has made this, people that maybe would have had these feelings that would have never acted on it, now it's just accessible. You look at Josh Duggar, from the Duggars that was arrested, the ones that have like 50 kids.
Right.
I mean, he's out seeking it out at his business. It's just, you hate to look at everybody like they're potentially a predator, but unfortunately, if you're going to be around my kid, I'm going to be hyper vigilant. I don't care if you, if you're a priest or, a pastor or a doctor or a nurse. It's just, the world we live in, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think people are getting used to that as well. I don't think, at least I don't know. I don't have kids. I never had kids. So I'm just wondering if I have a lot of nieces and nephews. I'm just wondering if that, it's become so acceptable right now, so that if I came to you and said, hey, Gigi, my daughter or my son wants to have a play date with your daughter or son, and then I just have that conversation with you and say, you know what, I just want to make sure that you're cool, and if anything weird happens, I won't kill you.
Right.
Like, is that conversation happening? Is it happening with your friends?
Luckily for me, with when my kids were little, I live on a street with most of my family. So my parents are 2 houses up. My brother's across the street with his wife. And now my nephew lives across the street and 3 houses up with his wife and their 2 kids. So I was lucky that, like, babysitting, I never had to go outside my family.
Yeah.
But for play dates when they were little, I would be like, who's going to be in the house? I mean, and if it offended somebody, sorry. But, I gave, when my kids were old enough to go to sleepovers at friends' house, I would definitely have a conversation with the parents on the phone. And then my kids had a phone on them. And I'm like, look, if you feel uncomfortable or you just don't want to be there, or, if you get a weird vibe, call me, I'll come get you. So for me, I was like the parent that gave my kids a little iPhone that was just very restricted when they were 7 or 8.
Right.
Because that's, I don't want them to depend on anybody if they're uncomfortable to say, I want to go home. Can I use your phone?
Sure.
My kids always had that line to me, but I would rather be that parent, just asking, like, who all's going to be in the house when she's there? What are your plans? Like, where is she sleeping? And that kind of thing, than just the parent that's like, hey, go have fun. I'm not going to vet these people because it's just a mad world. And we see every day what happens to, people even you trust. So
yeah.
Hypervigilant. Yeah. And I know I have friends who go way over. They'll literally look up, does this person have any kind of a record at this house? Is there any kind of violent crimes? And,
Well, Well, with social media now, you can go to those people's pages. You can go to their Facebook, their Twitter, YouTube, and kind of get a vibe for them. And I think just, at least I would hope, at least just talking to somebody, and you're not just going to say, okay, you can go over to this person's house without kind of vetting them at first. So I would hope that parents are at least spending time with that other family on
Yeah.
some level. On some
Yeah,
level.
I mean, I never just sent my kid to a house on even a conversation. When I would take my kids,
Mhm.
I'd stop and get out and talk to the mom that was there, or just and I hate to say it, but there was a couple of times where probably just overprotective on my part, but where a single dad had
Mhm.
custody of his daughter, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm just not comfortable, and it's not
Mhm.
necessarily fair to that person, but at the
Mhm.
same time, I'd rather be a little bit more cautious than to be sorry.
Right.
So for me, it was, and then if it's a single mom, I'm like, is your boyfriend coming to stay? Is somebody
Mhm.
spending the night that, doesn't normally live here? That's about where I would go. And,
Yeah, yeah.
you
Or
know,
do play dates in a public area, go to a park
yeah.
or something like that, go to a birthday party until you get to know that person over the course of 6 months to a year, and then you can start to feel
Oh,
more
yeah.
comfortable about them, sleeping
Yeah.
over. So,
And
I think
and I
that
really armed my kids from a very young age with the knowledge
Mhm.
of predators because it's just such a threat no matter where they are.
Mhm.
And so they probably knew more at younger ages than some kids do, but
Mhm.
doing what I do, I'm just hyper vigilant. And I was like, look, this stuff happens and it's sad, but like if anybody ever makes you
Mhm.
even feel uncomfortable, you have to tell me. They may, I'm like, they may threaten you or say, I'll kill your mom. Like,
Mhm.
let them come at me. But you just
Mm,
have
yeah.
to have these conversations with your kids. It's not, a rainbows and butterflies kind of world anymore, unfortunately.
No. Hey, parents aren't vetting anymore. One of my neighbors was letting their daughter spend nights with us, and they'd only met me once.
Yeah. I mean,
I
it's,
know. And
and
there's
then,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't get it. And the other thing that bothers me too is, we see a lot. Mom has a boyfriend, mom has a baby, and
Mhm.
these guys have no bond with these kids, and they're leaving their newborns or their 3-month old with the boyfriend, and he ends up and shakes them to death. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, be sure who you're leaving your people with. I mean,
I
you
know.
know, I but,
Yeah.
I've seen it too. I've had parents who, will let their kid come stay and literally it's a text message and that's it. And I go out
Mhm.
and meet them and say, "Hey, look, here's my number if you're concerned. Here's ways to get in
Yeah.
touch with me." But I've had parents just literally drop their kids and not even wait.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, "Whew,
Yeah, Capri Law, I have a house full of kids constantly. I've never had a single conversation with most of the parents. It's wild.
it is." And I think, people,
I guess
some
it's
people just don't like watching their kids and they're like, "Oh, sure, you got somewhere to go. Bye. See
right,
you later.
right,
I'm play Candy Crush."
right. I guess it just boils down to some parents are going to be vigilant like you. Other parents are going to be like, yep, see you later,
Yep.
Godspeed.
And it's not necessarily that the parents don't care. I think just
Mhm.
even on an adult level, the education isn't there.
Yeah,
People don't think like I think because I have a true crime podcast,
yeah.
people think it'll never happen to me or my family. And
Mhm,
unfortunately it does every day. But yeah, so it's not that these people are lazy or I think it's
mhm.
just people don't think that some people don't think that way all the time.
That's true. No, you're right. We see the worst of the worst, and we see it day in and day out. So we are hypersensitive to that. I think.
Yeah.
I've always kind of been paranoid. I spent 17 years in New York City, so I was always looking, always looking both ways, looking around, behind my back. So I still have that now, even though I live in a very rural situation.
Mhm.
I don't trust a lot of people
Nope.
straight away. You have to gain my trust, kind of thing.
Same.
So I I think there's people like us, but then there's also people like we're describing where they're not bad parents. We're not saying that, but they're just, they have other priorities, or they're not exposed to what we're exposed day in and day
Exactly.
out.
Just not hyper aware of how
Yeah,
widespread it is. You hear
yeah,
about it on the news here and there,
yeah,
locally, but I mean, it's the whole mentality of like just not being educated, and that'll never happen.
yeah. How many
You
times
know,
have we heard, "Wow, this is a sleepy town. We never once thought that Freddy Krueger was living next door."
right?
That kind
Well,
of
that
thing.
was here when this case, really busted wide open. Is that we have
Mhm,
our fair share of murders. This
mhm,
just had an extra element to it.
mhm,
Every murder's bad, but just this was different. This was so targeted. It wasn't just a random,
mhm,
drug deal gone bad or a domestic dispute where, yeah, this just had so many layers. And I found
mhm.
myself thinking that, which is, I can't believe this is Greenville. You
Yeah.
know, it's just one of those that I report on from elsewhere.
Sure. Actually, that just brings up a good question about the drugs. So they never explained the cocaine. So what was your impressions? Like, did Zach bring that to try and frame her even more? Like
I
what?
think that the prosecution kind of hinted at that in their
Mhm.
closings, I believe,
Yeah.
that, he left the cocaine because her toxicology was negative.
Yeah.
Um, and Tina didn't use as far as they were all drug tested at one point too.
Yeah.
But I think the prosecutor, if I'm not mistaken, insinuated he killed her and then left the cocaine,
Right. So I'm
which is
just
like, where
looking.
are you getting cocaine? You're hanging out with like, you know,
Yeah.
but well, it's Greenville. Drug problems just as
Yeah.
bad here as is anywhere.
Oh,
So,
I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, you can get it anywhere
yep.
at this point, and have for a while. Yeah, just it was 4.97 grams, but they didn't. Yeah, nobody. Christina said no, they never did it, and I think actually Christina said that they. I'm sorry, Tina said. Tina said that they had never used it, but Tina, the sister, was also saying that Christina had to get drug tested. I think every 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of
Yeah.
typical when you're in a custody dispute and you have a guardian involved.
Hmm.
You there are just things the court requires if you
Yeah.
are battling for custody, and drug screens are one. But I also think that John Mello had made the accusation.
Hmm.
And I don't know that everything John Mello said about Christina is true. I also don't think everything was false.
Hmm.
Um, so from what I understand, it seems maybe it was likely she was an escort at some point.
Hmm.
So, maybe she did have a past with drugs.
Right.
Could be the court just that's standard for all guardian ad litem situations where they're, anything they can find to show you're unfit, they can
Hmm.
prove it, they're going to do it. So both sides typically have to give drug screens randomly, and that kind of thing. I know we had another case here of Victoria Rose. Victoria Rose. It was the reality show contestant that was adopting the three kids. She
Hmm.
beat the kid to death.
Yeesh.
And it was my train of thought just went that way. I haven't taken my ADHD medicine. So,
Oh,
what was I saying?
we were talking about the drug testing. There was
Oh,
a woman reality show.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so, there were a lot of things there that wasn't caught. Like, the
Hmm.
house was in foreclosure, and they hadn't, adopted these kids yet. The kids
Hmm.
came on this reality show. When you have a foster kid, you're not supposed to show them on TV or even in Facebook photos. People I know that were in the process of adopting always had to blur the kids' faces out, you know? So you have things that are just like, we're going to do this, but you also CPS is so understaffed, and
Hmm.
these people want to do a good job. But, I think that like Christina's case too, was there things that were missed because these departments are so overstaffed? Probably, if you dig deep and were able to look at all the
Hmm.
depositions about the suspected abuse and, have
Hmm.
access to her interview, part of the problem I think too just lies in the fact that these guardians, these CPS workers, they got 130 kids every month they're supposed to see for a reasonable amount of time. It just,
Hmm.
I don't know. It's just we have a huge problem,
Yeah.
with this. And then you think, should you relax the laws about allegations of molestation? But then how many times have we seen parents throw that in family
Hmm.
court just to accuse the other parent of something that's shocking?
Yep.
Something's got to change, but then you think it'll be just open season on the allegations flying
Yeah.
if it
Yeah.
doesn't take a high burden of proof to
Hmm.
prove. And then you know how it is if you're accused of doing something like that and you're proven to be 100% innocent, people are still in their mind going to see you as what you were accused of, even though you were. So I don't know. I just feel like something has to change in that area where
Hmm.
maybe there's not such a high burden of proof to get
Hmm.
at least a search warrant. Because if you're innocent, you're like, here, you don't need a search warrant. Take my phone.
Sure. Yeah.
You know,
Talk to my son. Talk to my daughter.
right?
Yeah. Here's my phone. Here's. Yeah. I
Yeah,
agree.
but in this
Yeah.
case, it just there, according to the investigator, there was no probable cause,
Hmm.
even though
Yeah.
the abuse was very much happening. And that's scary.
Yeah. Now, Sel has a question. I think we kind of touched upon this. Has the guardian, which I'm assuming was that Vanessa? Was that?
She's amazing. Can I just say she was at the
Yeah. Yeah.
bond hearing with her husband, and she
Hmm.
is so fun. She
Yeah.
is just and she literally one day during testimony was one floor down at a
Hmm.
hearing that had to do with her and John Mello. So she's
Ah,
still involved in litigation with him. Uh,
okay.
but Yeah, I mean, she had a lot of one-on-one with the daughter because with a guardian, what they do, and she kind of explained it, is she spends time with the kid alone. You
Hmm.
go to the father's house to make sure that the accommodations are good, that there's food in the fridge. It's a clean house. It's not in disarray or
Hmm.
not living in squalor. So she
Right.
would have spent time with the child and Christina, the child and John Mello, the child alone, talk to Christina alone, the dad alone. It's very involved with these guardians and what they have to do. And, unfortunately, Christina pulled the wool over this woman's eyes and is fighting for her kid, using these funds that are like donation funds for international parental kidnappings. And, you're sitting here thinking, is it just because she wanted to make money off her daughter doing this stuff? Because, I saw pictures of Christina and the daughter that were shown to me by family, and it's just hard to look at. It's these pictures of them both smiling, but what's going on.
Yeah.
It was hard to look at.
Widespread Panic asks, where is she now? Foster care. She's probably with the sister. Or the sister's trying to get Tina. She's trying to get custody.
Yeah, so I know she's what she says the next of kin, or sort of probably the one that I think John Mello had to have a plan in place in the event of his arrest. I mean, he probably knew if he had anything to do with it, it was going to come out on the stand potentially. But the last I heard, she was just in emergency protective custody. And so past that, I'm not sure if she's been returned to her, but I would assume if you have an adult family member that vets out to Child Protective Services in the family court, the goal would be to put her back at least where she has some normalcy. So I hope so, because John Mello's older daughter really seems like a sweetheart who loves her sister. And, that's obviously would be best for the child too, just to be with family.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to find my notes real quick. I think it's Lutina, right? Lutina. So Christina, Lutina.
Yeah, it was Tina and Christina. Yeah.
I think she was on the stand. She was saying that her and Mello had just they were kind of fighting back and forth, but Mello had custody, but she had partial custody. I'm just trying to find my notes. Do you remember that?
So, from my understanding, was Christina pretty much had standard visitation, because when they released those charges for John Mello, he was determined to be the custodial parent. So that would be sole custody. If she had any kind of joint custody of her, she would have had that charge would have stuck. Right. So that was what the judge said during Mello's trial, which is he had full custody. He could have taken her to Italy all day long because she had no right to her kid. So it probably was your every other weekend, 2 weeks in the summer, every other holiday. Mother's Day typically goes to the mom. But whether or not John went outside of that agreement and let her go more, highly doubt it. But it would have been minimal visitation, just compared to what a full-time mother would be doing.
Yeah. So, okay. So my notes say the question was, where does the daughter live? And the sister says, I reached an agreement with Mr. Mello, and that Mello has had custody since August of 2023. And that's
after the murder. I think there was some back and forth of her maybe wanting custody or partial custody or very generous visitation. And I know at one point she did have that. John Mello has made accusations against Tina that have been unfounded, but it probably enough to get the child out of the home while it's investigated. But again, nothing ever that to this point that validated it. I think John Mello probably just wanted a complete break from anybody associated with Christina, because I'm sure in his mind, people knew they were covering it up. Whether or not that's true, I can't say.
Yeah.
But so it's just it's crazy. But I think Mello got desperate. It's he was right. I tell everybody I talk to about this case, say what you will about John Mello, he was right in the end, and way worse than he ever could have imagined.
Yeah. So Irish Amy, we kind of touched upon this, but has anything more been found regarding the accusations against Lutina?
No, and I've seen the text message where that was alleged, but nothing. I mean, I've heard that most people think this was just Mello trying to not have to fight her for custody.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, totally in the dark about that.
Right.
I don't know. I just feel like for me, it's like, it's just hard to know. But she didn't give me, look, we just talked about how anybody, she seemed really devastated, just on that very basic level of losing somebody like this and missing her niece. I don't think the child cares for the aunt, to be honest, from what I've heard. Didn't really want to go over there. So it's, it's just hard.
Yeah. Emma Roth asks, what was Mello right in? Well, he was right about the allegations that Christina and Bradley Post were abusing the daughter, a friend, possible animals.
It ain't possible. It's a fact.
I was trying to be kind, but yeah.
Yeah, no, we just gonna throw it all out there. No, so yeah, Emma, it very confirmed that she was
Yeah.
directly involved. We were described several things that this investigator watched with his own 2 eyes, and she was as much, if not more, of a participant than Bradley Post as far as being on camera.
Yeah. And looking at her picture, she's holding the little pug, right? And when I first started to investigate this and write descriptions and pull everything together, I'm like, oh my God, she looks so adorable and so cute with the little dog. And she's, a pet lover. How could this happen to her? How dare, this person do this to her? And then I looked at, Mello, she had a kid with Mello and he looks like he's in his 70s. And then, she's engaged to Brad Post. He looks like he's in his 70s. Like, she looks like she's in her 40s. Like, what's going on here?
She had a type. Both of them very wealthy. So she was working part-time, clearly making some money, I think, from everything we've heard about the distribution of this child abuse material with Bradley Post. But this, I think about it, it just blows my mind over and over and over when I think about this case. But yeah, so he was right. The child was being abused in a very, very bad way. And so that's just the thing that I always say is like, do I kind of hope John Mello gets off and can get back with his daughter? Maybe. Yeah. That's what she needs. That's what, she loves her dad. In the end, he wasn't wrong, whether or not he could prove it. But I think as a parent too, when something's not right. And he had that intuition that whatever she told him or whatever his gut said, absolutely 100% correct. So I'm really kind of rooting for Mello just to be out and give his daughter some normalcy and let them move on with their lives.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to take her a long time.
If ever.
If ever. Lots of therapy and. Sarcasm. Do you know if multiple 9, I think, hard drives in Christina's house?
There were some found. Or was that Mello's house? I'll have to go back and look. But there were a lot. Maybe there was some at Christina's.
I know for sure they went to his house as they were investigating the murder. They went to his house and they found, I don't know how many they found, but they definitely found.
There was a laptop at Christina's though, that they did get that may have had some of that on there. So I think you're right. Maybe there was some in the house. We know the locker, the phones and all that, and there was a hard drive. And then there was even one thumb drive that it was messed up. And somebody, Troy from Blunt Force Media asked the solicitor a really good question after the trial, because they testified, the investigator said on the stand, we had so much evidence against Christina and Bradley Post, we just stopped looking. And he asked, well, did you finish looking at some point? Because potentially there could have been other victims on those hard drives if you just stopped. Right. And the solicitor said, at that point, everything was gone through, but just, I think what the investigator was getting to on the stand is they had more than enough to arrest Bradley Post. They have more than enough to prove Christina was directly involved in the abuse as a participant. And, but we were all a little worried, like there could be other kids on there, but they did, eventually look at everything they were able to pull up. But some of the things were damaged, whether or not that's intentional. He had a ways to go though. If he was trying to destroy evidence with, what they found, it was excessive.
I just can't imagine. Then I also think of these agents and these law enforcement personnel that have to actually go through and slog through and look at all that stuff and categorize it and all that stuff. Yeah.
Hats off to them. And I know people that do that for a living, and they're just, they can go to homicides and see a dead body, go home and eat spaghetti. But these kind of crimes, people typically don't stay in these areas very long. It's a high turnover rate because, especially if you have kids, just being an adult and seeing that happen to kids, but having to watch that stuff for a job of kids being victimized. I mean, bless the people that do to bring justice to these victims, but I don't see how it doesn't mess you up for life.
I agree. A lot of people in our chat will like, you're showing a trial about a kid. I can't do that. And I understand that and I appreciate it, but I'm also of the thought of like, I'm not going to shy away from that because those people need an advocate. They need the story to be told. And I want, if I'm not going to tell it, then who will? So I then try to put myself in the position of looking at, thousands of videos of kids. And I just can't,
that's the important thing. I don't typically cover these kind of cases on my podcast, but I did because it was intertwined with this. I really wasn't planning on going to Bradley post-trial because that would have come in video form and photo form, and I don't want to see it. What was described was bad enough, but it's just, oh my gosh. Yeah. I really think he pleads out though. I don't see him taking it to trial.
Yeah.
Why would you? You've got thousands of videos where he is seen in videos as well.
Yeah.
You just seem to be more centered around Christina.
Yeah.
As a more frequent participant in that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, hats off to those who do that. And I think it's important, like people like you do cover that stuff because where I just can't. Because victims who are currently victims or people who are unfortunately future victims, we need to make this a conversation we're having where it's not a taboo thing and victims don't feel a stigma of being a victim. And so we have to tell these stories far and wide and show past victims, current victims, future victims. You have people out there that care. They don't know you, but they want to right this wrong or they want to support justice. Or you see how people come together to protect these kids on social media. So it's important that people see that unlike the 70s, 80s, 90s even, we weren't having this conversation. It was a very taboo subject. And a lot of times it was swept under the rug, even by the families who found it out.
Absolutely.
Because unfortunately, you just had that stigma. And I think that's one thing we've really got to remove the stigma for victims, because I saw an interesting quote the other day. It says, the kid you're abusing today will be the one that will take you down eventually. And I think that's like, I want a t-shirt with that to just go out there and be like, these kids aren't going to stay little forever. And one day they may be big enough and feel safe enough to call you out.
Yeah.
But you think about how many kids daily are abused this way, physically, sexually, and it's just not going to be found out.
Right. And then further, they may then grow up and perpetuate that themselves.
It is a cycle, and it is just that was one thing that expert, who was, by the way, $700 an hour, and he couldn't even estimate how much time he had spent on this case had he been allowed to testify for the defense. He said, there are physical changes that can stunt kids' growth. It messes with the synapses and the neurons in your brain, shortens your DNA, literally alters your genetic makeup when you're exposed to this. And that is just, we're learning so much more now about the biological effects of this kind of stuff, where it's not just emotional. It literally changes your body and how it functions. And that is terrifying.
Yeah. I would just, that's first I've heard of that. I thought it would just be mental, emotional, you disassociate, you splinter into different personalities or whatnot just to protect yourself, but it alters your DNA. That's amazing.
It does. And I'd never really heard that in depth. I'd heard there were biological changes, but his testimony would have been amazing had he been allowed to give it, just from an educational standpoint.
Absolutely.
Us better understanding the impact on not only children, but then people who are in domestic violence situations, or, anybody who's subjected to repeated traumatic abuse.
Yeah.
Well, change your body.
Look at the Menendez brothers. They just had a hearing that we covered the press conference. I didn't really, I was into true crime, but I wasn't into it like I am now. So I'm kind of revisiting that. And Aaron and I did watch that Netflix documentary that totally opened just opened my eyes to that. And you were talking earlier about the stigma. And I think we've gotten beyond that now of, it's children, but then also, men,
Right.
So I like, where do you stand with that? Is that, do you want to go down that path a little bit or no?
The thing for me is this: a lot like Zachary Hughes, in that second trial, they were not allowed to give their defense. And that is a very valid defense. In 2025, you would not have these boys or young men being made fun of on nightly talk shows and things like that. Things have changed.
Yeah. Saturday Night Live, they were being made fun of.
Right. And it's horrifying to even think about. But for me, I think when Roy Rosello came out and said he was a victim of Jose Menendez, that gave some validation of somebody who had no dog in the fight. He was not going to get really any financial gain from doing it. There's no money to be had from the Menendez family anymore. It was, and if you go to his Instagram, it's very pro Eric and Lyle of, hey, I've believed these boys for a very long time. He just finally felt he needed to validate what they were saying.
Mhm.
I don't know that I'm convinced one way or another. It was a very egregious crime. It was,
Mhm.
you had time to do things differently. But at the same token, if you take what this guy would have testified to,
Mhm.
if you're subjected to that kind of abuse repeatedly throughout your childhood, you're not just a 19, 20, 21-year-old. You
Mhm.
are emotionally stunted. Your
Yeah.
brain doesn't compute things. But it's one of those cases that I don't have a strong um, I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I do think they should get a new trial. I think a
Mhm.
jury should hear this with somebody like this expert that was going to testify
Mhm.
to open their minds into, because everybody says, oh, they could have left. They could have
Mhm.
left. They could have just moved out.
Yeah.
When you're a victim, it's not that easy. It's kind of the same reason I think that women or men don't leave their abusers.
Mhm.
You're financially enabled to this person. It's
Mhm.
not like, well, we can just leave. And I think the boys definitely love their money. So there was a lot of
Mhm.
reasons they didn't leave. But it
Mhm.
goes back to that witness, though, the $700 an hour witness who said, I couldn't afford my own services, who was
Mhm.
going to testify that the brains of children who are subjected to this, it doesn't develop the way yours and mine does, where they kind of cited that irrational fear that the average person wouldn't say, they're
Mhm.
going to kill us tonight. But if
Right.
you've been abused by one of them and the other parent hid it,
Mhm.
as they claim,
Yeah.
that irrational fear that you or I would say, ain't gonna happen, or
Mhm.
just move out, like get you a job, you're smart, do your
Mhm.
own thing and never go back. That was really sort of the whole point of that guy's testimony is it doesn't compute that way to somebody with essentially PTSD.
Right, right. And I think because they had been abused, since they were young children, even though you're in your early 20s and you want to make that break, you can't because in the back of your mind, you're going to be kicked out of whatever, family dynamic. And I think not only is it financial, but it's also emotional, mental, that people don't want to, or it's hard to make that break because it's like the devil almost,
Yeah,
and it's hard for people to make that break. And it's important, I think, to have these discussions and to get it out in the open to say, you have to somehow find that strength within you to make that break because you will be a better person on the other side of it. Easier said than done,
right.
but at least we're having the conversation and hopefully giving some talking about the topic and the subject. So.
Yeah, and I think too, it's a unique case in that you have both sides of the family, with the exception of one who says let the boys out, and then you
Mhm.
have cousins and other people who say, well, as a kid it didn't really compute, but
Mhm.
when I was a kid, Jose would take Lyle in the room, and Kitty would tell us don't go down there.
Yeah.
So there were things as they grew and came to understand patterns of abuse and things to look for that you're naive to as a kid.
Mhm.
There's some validations on that end too, I think, that just warrant a new trial. And I'm
Mhm.
just a firm believer that if your defense is going to be this, then you should be able to get on the stand and tell why. It was allowed
Mhm.
in the first trial, it was a hung jury.
Yeah.
Second trial, not allowed,
Yep.
conviction.
Yep.
So, same with Zachary Hughes, it doesn't make your victim look good, but that's where, as a prosecutor, you come in and you say, yeah, she was not likable, horrible mother, horrible human, but you
Mhm.
still can't stab her 35 times.
Right.
Like, you don't have that right.
Right.
And I think that things like that, if they're going to get on the stand and use that defense and directly testify, then it should. I just feel like your defense should be allowed to come in, even if it's not credible.
Mhm.
You have to convince that jury, and then the prosecution's job is to unconvince that jury.
Right. Right.
So I felt like I think at least a new trial is warranted, and let a
Yeah.
jury look at it. We have a new set of eyes. Like we talked about them getting made fun of. This movement really started on TikTok with
Mhm. Yeah.
with the Netflix documentary, and it's
Mhm.
a lot of people my kids' age, 18,
Mhm.
19, 20, who grew up in a world where you do talk about this stuff, or at least a lot more than you did back in the day. And so the
Absolutely.
fresh set of eyes of these young people who, just look at it in a very different way than we did when it happened, and the jurors and the judge and everybody else.
Mhm.
And even the prosecutor at the time said, um, boys can't be sexually assaulted. They don't have the right plumbing. It was
Yeah.
just such a tone deaf statement listening
Mhm.
to it in this day and age. But
Mhm.
that was really the mentality back then is boys weren't victims. And so
Yeah.
I just think given the updated times and the knowledge we've learned about the physical, psychological effects, new trial at minimum.
Yeah. 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 Well, Mr. Wilkins was saying, I think both in his opening and his closing was that angry heart, so you
Yeah.
have to look at, and he said cold blooded, I think 6, 7 times in his closing, and he would say cold blooded, like he was really trying to get that emotion across to the jury. And I think then also you have to look at the state of Hughes's mind, right? I mean, that goes in, that plays a huge part in it. And his state of mind was that he truly felt he was the hero. He was going to save the daughter from this situation.
I
You
have
know?
no doubt in my mind that when he went in that house and from the time he delivered that first blow to the final, he thought he was doing the kid a favor. I don't think
Mhm,
he just said, I'm going to go kill her for the heck of it, whether it's true or not. I think he was truly, truly convinced
mhm,
that, and he was right in the end.
mhm,
They were both right. But I don't think he went there just as some psychopath to kill for whatever. I think he absolutely thought, hey, I'm leaving. Her dad's in Italy. She's going to be left to the wolves if I don't do something.
yeah,
And that may be a heavy burden, especially when you go to law enforcement, it doesn't go nowhere.
mhm,
But
yeah,
then again, vigilante society, gosh, people be getting stabbed for everything.
yeah, we can't have that. Well, I think what we talked about before, even though he went to the law enforcement meeting, Hughes, it was kind of half-assed. I mean, he called and he lied. He said, "Oh, this person, this
Yeah.
this girl is being abused," and
Not
I
even
think,
sexually, it was,
yeah,
mental and physical 'cause
yeah,
the way he testified to it is they did nothing about that, so I thought maybe if we throw this in there, they might look and dig and find something,
mhm,
but at the same time, it's just, I think the one thing the prosecutor did a great job of, and we discussed it, is letting that jury know this was her dad's friend. It's not like he was a
mhm,
second dad to her, it's not like they had all this time to bond over the years. They met
mhm,
maybe 5 or 6 times.
yeah,
And that was it, and then they moved,
right.
so that's something too, I think that as a juror would have affected me,
Mhm.
you know?
Rachel B, and she deals a lot with this in her profession. The thing is, state of mind doesn't matter for conviction unless you are claiming not guilty, reason of insanity. Now, Rachel, I thought that they were talking about malice, and they were trying to prove that in the. I thought they were trying to prove his state of mind.
Yeah, and that was the first
But
jury question we had is,
yeah,
does it have to be malice for it to be
mhm,
murder? And the
mhm,
judge
yeah, that's
was
right.
gonna send a note back, and he said, "Nope, you know what? I'm gonna bring him in, define malice, and I'm gonna tell them, yes, it is required for murder." And
Right.
that's when that juror, when they were hung up before they moved on, did the 35 stab motions on the table and was
Hmm.
like, because they couldn't discuss the child abuse and said,
Hmm.
"How is this not malice?"
Hmm.
Even though they knew what they heard, you can't undo it.
Hmm.
Um, I think his state of mind, it has to be malice though. With 35 stab wounds, you
Hmm.
you do have to go in there with that intention to murder, and that's different
Right.
from your reason why.
Gotcha. All right. Rachel's dropping some more stuff. It's not just about state of mind. It had to do with the pre-planning as well.
Yeah, and he was
Yeah.
very open about it. "Hey, I just chose the
Yeah.
route that wouldn't get me on the most cameras, and,
Hmm.
I know the area where he came from at the mountain home. It's probably about 30 minutes from me up
Hmm.
towards the North Carolina line."
Hmm.
But, like the prosecutor said, he had a pretty long drive, probably an hour from there to her house. He had
Hmm.
plenty of chances to turn around, and
Hmm.
that state of mind was, "I gotta do this,
Yeah.
and I
His
gotta
own
do it
ad-
now."
his own admission was like he was shaking. He thought he was going to vomit. He was nauseous. He was following his head. He wasn't following his gut. He,
Right, yeah, this was a
you
very
know.
obviously emotion your reasoning,
Yeah.
had you not looked at it in such an emotional way, you would have said, "I'm gonna get caught. My life's over. I'll never play like a baby grand again. I'm gonna be playing some cheap, electronic keyboard in the pokey."
Hmm.
When they have music days.
Yeah.
But it was emotion driven. And I think that Zach, was an older sibling to 5 and then one biological sibling,
Hmm.
5 adopted, and had that protector mode, I guess, just felt like he was her only hope, especially with John Mello in Italy, knowing she was with her mom 24/7.
Hmm.
And like I say, it's so hard because I don't hate the guy, but at the same time, you can't love him either. I
Gotcha.
love the fact that he freed that kid,
Yeah.
and I hate
Yeah.
to say that, but it's the truth because gosh knows, what would have happened 3 years later almost
Hmm.
or over
Yeah.
3 over 3? Yeah, over 3 now.
Hmm.
It would have
Yeah.
just been repetitive and more damage as if it wasn't already bad enough.
Yeah. What did you think? Speaking of the jury questions, what did you think when they came out? They had three, right? There were three
Mhm.
jury questions. So what did you guys think in the gallery?
Well, that first one, like I said, we were like, I literally said, this is very pro defense. His
Mhm,
supporters, the defense attorneys, looked very pleased with that first question. We thought,
mhm,
there were a few holdouts, and we were
mhm,
like, there's holdouts. Somebody just
mhm,
couldn't unhear it. And
mhm,
even though they're probably not talking about it in there, they're hearing Zachary Hughes say Christina Parcell abused her daughter. When
mhm,
you got to the harassment stuff, I really just kind of thought maybe they would go lesser on that, which they did. They got second degree. I think he was sentenced to 5 years time served, or
mhm,
at least he got credit for time served. So, I think that was maybe their way of saying to Zach, like, dude, you can't do this, but like, we get it.
mhm,
Those of us, even though we can't sit here and say we're going to maybe give him a little break on the harassment stuff.
mhm,
But I think it was a hard decision for those who really were convicted by what he said and probably found some validity in there somewhere of why he did what he did.
mhm,
I think that second degree harassment, I thought they're going to go lesser on that,
mhm,
because she was in those pictures, had been on the escort site since 2009, from what I understand, even though it was inactive. So
mhm.
I think people understood our victim was not a good person, but I think maybe that was just a little, all right, well, you got life, but we're going to get you on second degree for this.
Yeah. Aaron just texted me that one of our mods, Widespread Panic, actually found a police report from Greenville that's a little disturbing. It's about Lutina.
Yeah, and I've heard those
Have you heard
rumors, and
about this?
I don't talk
Yeah.
about it because it's just a rumor. I don't
Okay.
want to get sued, and
Even
I
though
live here.
it's an incident report.
Yep.
Okay.
And
Well.
John Mello sent me the text messages from when
Okay.
this allegedly first happened.
All right. We'll let it
Uh,
go then.
yeah,
We'll let it go.
yeah, I'm sure it's been investigated, and that has not been recently. And
Mhm.
there's been no charges, but of course there were never charges in the beginning. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'd seen the police report. We definitely talked about it at breaks, but like I
Okay.
say, my interactions with Tina was just for me personally pleasant. So
Mhm.
I don't have bad feelings about anybody until I have a reason. So I can't
We
say anything bad about her because she was just very kind to me every time we spoke. I didn't get any weird vibes
gotcha. Gotcha.
whatsoever. But I mean, we talked about that
Okay.
earlier too. People aren't assuming, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot with this case, and it
Mhm.
becomes the line of what's true and what was really just a Hail Mary from John Mello to
Yeah.
totally remove that kid from anybody having to do with Christina.
Mhm.
It's kind of hard to answer. I've heard there's not going to be any charges, but
Okay.
never
Fair enough.
know.
Yeah. You never know. So you are a fan of music.
Huge.
Every trial, we like to have band names. So here are some band names. You tell me what you think of some of these. The first was Melodrama,
Oh gosh, y'all are my kind of people.
Red Rum Sonata in D minor, Angry Heart, uh,
Oh my gosh.
The Courting Greenies, Alabama Revenge Porn, Pennies and Pianists, Unidentified Pesticide,
Oh my gosh. That is
Fure Delete,
oh my goodness. Just keep going. I love this.
the Speculators,
Oh my
Naked Pianist on a Bike,
god.
because they were going off on the way I was saying pianist, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm the 6'4", but all right, we got more. Let's see,
Oh,
because
that's great.
usually we only have like 2 or 3, and this one, for
People
whatever
just
reason,
yeah, no, it kept rolling.
we had a lot,
I
right?
think in lyrics, so,
Yeah, yeah. Was
I appreciate that so much.
right on. Well, some of these could be
What was that,
album.
Red Rum in D minor?
Yeah, yeah. Red Rum Sonata in D minor.
That is classic.
That's a good one, right? And so one of the this FBI cellular analyst, his name was Matthew Wild, and he talked about reliable data sets. So it was Matthew Wild and the reliable data sets.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
DNA Freezer. That was like a good techno band. DNA Freezer 1. Go Ask Malice. Malice in Wonderland.
Oh my gosh.
And that was it. So like I said, usually we get like 2, maybe 3. We had what,
That's
like
hilarious.
we had a good 10 there. So
Oh my yeah, you guys, I'm gonna have to keep up with these band names because that's awesome. I'm gonna have to contribute. We got some good
please,
ones coming up. We got Lori Vallow, we got Donna Adelson, we got Corey Richens. It's gonna be
yeah,
a really busy spring.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stefan Stearns.
Oh, yeah. See, I don't cover that one
You're
because
not
I
going to do
just
that one.
can't.
Yeah.
But how that mother is not in jail, I do not know.
I don't know either.
Just
Yeah.
what I know about that case. I
Yep.
followed Karen Reed for a while. There's just too much drama in that
Yeah.
case for me to
Yeah.
even want to like shake a stick at.
I hear you. What about the Zizians? Have you heard about them?
Mm-mm.
The Zizians. Yeah. We did we
Oh,
kind of
the
did
cult
a,
people?
the what?
Is that the cult people that just got
Yeah.
arrested? Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's I need to really research that one. It
Yeah.
seems very crazy.
Militant vegans. They're all like uber smart, like computer brains. They're anti-AI. Um, the leader, his name is Ziz or Ziz, so now they're calling themselves the Zizians. They killed a guy out in California because he wanted rent from them, so they stabbed him with a samurai sword. He survived, and he actually killed, I think, one of the attackers, and then he was going to testify against the other ones, and then another one of the group stabbed him, so he's gone. Then there's a couple in Pennsylvania, older couple. A member, their daughter was a member, so they were shot. They were found shot on New
Oh
Year's
my
Eve.
gosh. Oh, I need to
Yeah.
look at this one.
Oh, please do. Yeah. And then the latest was a border patrol. This border agent lost his life. He pulled over two of them like 20 miles from the Canadian border, and they shot him. They shot him in the
Oh
neck
my
and killed
good. People are crazy. How
him.
like, I think about Chad Daybell,
Yeah.
and you think about his pickup line, I was the brother of Jesus in a past life. Like, who believes that stuff?
I
Oh,
know, right?
wow. Okay, let me just go commit, serial killing for you. That was literally his pickup line. Or we had been married in a past life. I
Right,
mean, if
right.
somebody come up to me and tried to do, you think that though, although I did watch a special one time with a guy who was a psychiatrist who dealt with people who had been in cults. And
Mhm,
then they interviewed a cult leader who I guess didn't really commit any crimes, but just had a gathering. And he said, look, I can take anybody from any demographic, any background, any job. You give me a month and I'll
mhm,
have them believe in what I want because I know how to. And that's
mhm.
scary.
Yeah, yeah,
But you ain't
absolutely.
gonna convince me you were the brother of Jesus in a past life. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just like a bar,
I know, I know. Well, everybody in the past life thinks they're Caesar or King
Yeah,
Louis. No, you were just
yeah,
some grunt.
yeah. He
Yeah,
was also the Holy Ghost in another life too. And I'm like,
yeah.
mm,
Can you say God complex much?
yeah, loaded, loaded, locked and
Loaded, yeah.
loaded.
So this was fantastic.
Yeah, I had a blast. I really
Yeah,
haven't talked to anybody about this. So this is the first one I've done. So it's like getting all this off my chest and really just
awesome. Oh, I love
thinking
it.
in real time. I got a couple of more I'm doing later on, but just a fascinating case, and it's not over. We still
No.
got a whole other trial, possibly two, to go where, maybe more information is going to start coming out.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, we'll see what they have on Mello. I think it could be a largely circumstantial case
Mhm,
of, you could say, look, I mean, the guy's ticked off at me. He took it upon himself to go kill my ex-wife or my ex-girlfriend. And
mhm.
I didn't offer. Did you see any money transfers?
Right,
No. And that's what
right.
the prosecutor said, a struggling pianist. Somebody
Mhm.
said they wanted to hear me say pianist. There you go.
Yes,
Didn't take $5 or $10,000. And I
right.
thought that was pretty profound. So that goes to show you that state of mind. He
Mhm.
was doing, this little undercover murderous heroic work.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, everybody, if you don't know who Gigi is of Pretty Lies and Alibis, Aaron posted it in the chat, and I pulled it up on the screen here. And if you're just listening, it's YouTube at Pretty Lies and Alibis, and you also are on Twitter, right?
Twitter, Facebook, dabbling in TikTok, although it's like
Mhm,
I'm a one-person show.
mhm.
So I'm responsible for the research, recording, editing, graphics, everything. I'm so
Awesome.
bad about like updating TikTok or stuff like that on a regular basis. I need to find something that streamlines everything. I'm most active on Twitter.
Mhm,
And then with YouTube, so when I'm covering a trial, I just break down the day's testimony, typically in an hour or less. And
mhm,
that way, if you don't want to watch or don't, don't have time to watch, you can stay up to date with the meat of what was done. And when
mhm,
they're going through the courts, essentially, it's just all fact based. So
mhm,
today I'm going to recap Donna Adelson's hearing that's happening. Should probably be at the tail end now. And
mhm,
then John Paul Miller, Micah Miller's husband,
mhm.
um, he was just sued,
Okay.
saying that he had inappropriate relationships with a minor. I typically don't do those. I'm going to read those affidavits. So I break down filings, and just any news that kind of pops up about a case, just current. But I really try to keep my opinion out of it. It's something I've sort of kind of gravitated towards, to where before, especially when I had a co-host, we talked about our opinion a lot. But for me, I just like the facts, and my opinions, typically people don't want to hear it. If I do something like this, I will, but I just want, if you're interested in just, here's what this filing about Brian Koberger says, or here's what happened at the hearing, that's kind of my jam.
Gotcha. Fantastic. Well, thank you again for being on the show. Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me. We'll have to do it again.
Absolutely. You have an open invite forever to come back whenever, and we'll have you back on soon.
I'm going to come back with some band names for this case when we go to Mello. How about that?
Oh, perfect. Absolutely.
All right. I got 10 in my mind already.
Write them down. Send them over
guys.
to us.
Appreciate you guys hanging out today.
Thank you, Gigi.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. All right. So thank you to Gigi. That was fantastic. Really appreciate the insight into Zachary David Hughes. Please come back anytime. Next time you're in a courtroom and we're streaming, we'll have to do another jam. That was great. So thank you for that. All right, guys, it is 11:45 here on the East Coast. We're getting ready to pull up Todd Mullis. He's been going on, I think, since around 10 or so. So I'm going to take a quick break, and I will see you guys over at Todd Mullis. I don't think there's probably a redirect on. I'm not 100% sure. If there is, Aaron has set one up. But if not, just catch us over at Todd Mullis. We'll be picking up on day 3 of his relief hearing. So again, thank you, Gigi. Appreciate it. And thank you, guys. Thank you to Aaron. Thank you to our fantastic mods. Hellcat, Widespread Panic, Brat, OnlyFan, Therapist Fala, Florida PI Sam. You guys are the best. Thanks for keeping the chat in line, such as it is. And thank you guys for watching. And we will see you over at Todd Mullis starting in 15 minutes. Okay, bye.